I'd like to call the City Council study session to order for December 2nd, 2008. Can we have the roll call?
Mayor Lang,
Here?
Council Members Banker. Present. Blue. Here. Hanson. Levison. Here. McCoy. And Santos. Here. Mayor, we have a quorum.
Thank you. This is a study session. We're going to start with public invited to be heard. To speak to us, you can put your name on the list, and I have the list already, and those that aren't on the list that want to speak to us, I'll call on anybody else that would be interested after I go through the list. So to start with, Paul Tigers first.
Good evening, Paul Tiger, 831 First Avenue. Council members and staff, but especially the voters of Longmont, the Elections Task Force delivers a laundry list of advised changes this evening. And you've all been asked for the advice of voters. By investigation, listening to witnesses, and referring to constitutional law, we offer you a few good ideas. As opinions of on council vary widely, in campaign finance reform, it is always possible to have certain advisements will be enacted while others will not. Please take the opportunity to accept this package as is, understanding that it may be amended or reformed in the future. May not be the best there is, but it is in the step in the right direction given by voters from a disparate ideologies that thought it up. A group appointed by council. Dicing and slicing can have unintended consequences. The piece that consumed a few of us were definitions. To make the code clear, to make it defensible. While definitions are educational in reading them alone, they are a guide to future candidates and issues committees. Make it clear. My personal goals in this group were to have government's role in elections be limited to information, not limitation. Campaign finance reform is campaign finance reporting. We want to know, but we cannot, we want to know and see what's going on and who's supporting who, but we cannot allow government to set up artificial limitations. Report yes, limit no. The city has a task in informing third parties of performing friends of issues on how they must report to their election communications or fundraising to the city clerk. These persons may not register with the city clerk and she may not know of their work. A limitation on contributions to campaigns will create off-screen action by third parties. This code is and should remain about reporting. I support increased scrutiny, but not more limitations. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Joanne Austin.
Mayor Lang and members of City Council. My name's Joanne Austin. I live at 419 Terry Street, Longmont. I'm here this evening to share with you information about the Historic Westside Neighborhood Association's 4th annual Historic Home and Gift Tour, Art and Gift Tour. Each of you should have a flyer in front of you describing the tour. The tour this year is Saturday, December 6th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. We have 5 homes this year, all within walking distance of each other, so we're very green. The addresses are 908 3rd Avenue, 1013 4th Avenue, 1030 5th Avenue, 428 Pratt Street, and 529 Pratt Street. Donation is $7 for all 5 homes, and the donations will benefit a woman's work. This is a great opportunity to buy gifts from local artists and support a local nonprofit organization. We'd love to see all of you there this coming Saturday, December 6th. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Joanne. Gary Kuzmano.
Gary Kuzmano, 1213 Snowbank Court, Longmont. I filed a complaint recently with code enforcement about a very offensive sign in my neighborhood that has a word at best be described as vulgar on it. It was referred to the city attorney, says it doesn't amount to an offense under Title 10 or Title 15 of Longmont Municipal Code. I beg to differ with this. I was advised by somebody today not even to bring the word up at this meeting because it's televised and it could lead to serious FCC problems for the city. You can't find this word on a license plate. You won't find it you won't see it in this building, in a school, any city office, safety justice center, or a courtroom. It is vulgar, it is lewd, and I don't want to say what it is. After the city council, coffee with the council meeting Saturday, your city manager, Mr. Pedro, got a little snotty with me about it, and with a snide grin on his face said, "Look it up in a dictionary." Here's a dictionary, find it. Find it,
Gary,
all right? I looked it up on the internet. The Free Dictionary and also Merriam-Webster, and it is a vulgar term. I demand something be done about this. He also, because I complain about a lack of performance at code enforcement, a terrible job that they do, and things of this nature, he also said, I'm trying to control people. I am concerned for my community, the quality of life, the people that live here, and the children in this community. And for him to say stuff like this to me is totally inappropriate. I want this re-examined. I want something done. And if nothing is done by the middle of January, I'm going to protest by putting a sign up on my garage. Might as well let everybody do it. Let everybody see it. I demand something be done here, and I don't feel your behavior with me this weekend was appropriate
hey,
at all.
Gary. You know, I'll just make this comment. I don't want things to get personal here when people come up and speak to us in public. We're just leaving it at that, Gary. We're just leaving it at that. Nick Luann?
Good evening, Mayor and Councilmen. Very nice to come up and talk to you.
Your name and address, Nick, please.
My name is Lujan Tree Service, Nick Lujan. 2108 Gay Street.
Okay.
And I came up to get something out of my chest, to find out why a person that he knew what happened in my farm, that somebody had put, how do you explain that? Anyway, what I want to say, I want to find out who gave our community from the city of Longmont to the Mexicans. When me and my wife, we did work at the Roosevelt Park and did all that. And believe me, from the bottom of my heart, I love these people in the city of Longmont. I'm the one that I raised up the city of Longmont. I'm the one that I opened this city while the city manager was over there fooling around. And anyway, the people, they asked me, 1975, Mr. Lujan, will you do something for me? Name it. Will you run for mayor? Because we know you can do it. But you know, I feel sorry for you people. I love you. God bless you people. And I hope he'll help you. But this 1975, there you are. I did it for my people because I love him. But not because I didn't want to. I thought they were real nice people. I kind of straightened them up. They were kind of little bad people, but no, pretty soon they were just my brothers and my sisters. But why you people give our community to the Mexicans? When all the little white people and the white people sleeping in the river or sleeping in the park, I help them. I try and help them. I raise a lot of people in the city of Longmont. Believe me, they already grew up. And this man over here, who is the one he's supposed to take care of the city? Who is it? The people ask me from the West, I don't know how come they don't come and ask you. How come they came and throw us our snow over here? And the city workers were just driving around with the blades. I watch them. But you people don't go and visit the old people. Go visit the old people. Go ask them what they need. And then they like you, and then they see that. Then they say that you're the best people in the city of Longmont. Believe me, if the people asked me to run for mayor, I would again. Thank you, and God bless all the people outside. Amen.
Thanks, Nick. Anita Lynch.
My name's Nita Lynch. I live at 121 8th Avenue, Longmont. Mayor Lang and City Council members, I urge you to support campaign contributions limits for Longmont elections, but to reject the limit allowing an individual contribution of $1,000 as is proposed by the City Election Task Force. A limit of $1,000 is an excessive amount. Of the 5 cities that the task force surveyed, Loveland, Fort Collins, and Boulder all had a contribution limit for council members of $75 to $100. Furthermore, the state of Colorado contribution limit is $500 per individual for governor and $200 per individual for a representative or a senatorial candidate. The proposed Longmont $1,000 contribution limit is excessive and is stated by the minority of the campaign task force. It quotes, "It fits the definition of large campaign contribution as mentioned in Longmont's legislative declaration of the current LFCP Act, allowing wealthy contributors and special interest groups to exercise a disproportionate level of influence for corruption and the appearance of corruption. There is no valid justification in the campaign task force majority opinion for such high limits. They argue for transparency over limits as if those were mutually exclusive, and they argue for freedom of speech, which prompts the question whether they find state and national limits to be tyrannical. And if there is no evidence of corruption, as they argue, by contributors in Longmont, this is not the same as any evidence of the absence of influence. This is my paraphrase for Carl Sagan's observation that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And, in fact, the fuzzy pleading of the task force majority looks very much like campaigning for moneyed lobbying groups. Smaller contributions require candidates to build a bigger base to finance their campaign, which brings more people to the election process. We saw the effectiveness of grassroots contributions in our national election. A contribution limit for individuals, groups, PACs, a regulated industry, a labor organization, a corporation, or a lobbyist at a $300 per election cycle index for inflation every year is a reasonable limit. Thank you.
Thanks, Anita. Mike Sandberg?
Evening, Council, Major Lang, or Mayor Lang, I'm sorry. Mike Sundberg, 421 Bowen Street. My friend Larkin Point and I were collaborating at Longmont High School. Maybe you all read the paper yesterday. Ride Your Trike Day at Longmont High School. We approached the city clerk about this, Ms. Hanson. What we're asking for is a waiver of the $50 fee for the parade permit, as well as a waiver of insurance. We will stress safety in this event. What we're trying to do really is get the younger people of Longmont interested in helping out. What we want to do is we want to encourage our classmates to go out and buy tricycles and ride them down Sunset Street between Longspeak Avenue and Warren Avenue, at which point the tricycles will be donated to needy families in Longmont for the holidays. We want to stress the urgency of this because Christmas is coming up. We also plan on donating on December 18th these tricycles. Larkin and I will personally be there. We just feel like there's too much done by people that aren't necessarily on the ground, and we feel like students need to be more involved. I mean, we stress to our administration, we have the blessing of our administration, that we need to have more student-run functions. We would really appreciate your support on this, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Mike. Councilmember Banker?
Excuse me. It's not working.
I'm on TV.
Yeah, mine does work, but
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for coming down and getting involved with something like this. Just a couple of questions. What day would it be on? And tell me again the parade route and how long do you think this event would go on? Okay, maybe I need to. Does yours work?
Hello? Okay, cool. This is nice. All right. Our parade route is going to be between Longspeak Avenue and Warren Avenue, which is where Longmont High School and Sunset Street coincide. What? I'm sorry, what was the rest of your question?
Okay, the date and
Oh, the
then
date?
the time and how long you think your event would go on.
It'll be before school. It'll be December 10th,
December.
which is a Wednesday. We've actually had plenty of offers from the community, a lot of support from the community. I work at Red Lobster, at which point, when I tell my friends that, they all say, "Oh, we like the biscuits there." So I talked to my boss, at which point she decided that she would donate a bunch of food. And when, similar actions have been taken by many businesses that we've been contacted by. I mean, we have the blessing of the community. We've got just endless phone calls, Larkin, ridiculous.
Any idea on how many tricycles might be donated?
At this point, I mean, a week ago I would have said I have no idea. Now it's looking somewhere between 50 to 100 tricycles.
Wow. Okay. Well, good work.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
We'll talk about this perhaps at the end of our meeting
Okay.
and check with our attorney and find
Okay.
out what the liabilities might be. But first of all, thank you for going ahead
thank
and
you.
doing something like this. It's pretty cool.
Thank you. And I want to stress that we will try to condone any amount of safety necessary. Thank you for your time.
thanks, Mike. Sherry Malloy?
Good evening, Mayor Lang and members of City Council. My name is Sherry Malloy. I live at 2113 Rangeview Lane here in Longmont. I want to briefly comment on the Election Task Force's recommendations. First, I want to compliment members of the task force for their time, energy, and expertise, and especially for building consensus around important recommendations to clean up the current ordinance by requiring deadlines, extra deadlines, more reporting, enacting penalties for breaking the rules, establishing distinctions between being late on reporting versus not filing at all, and coming up with some sort of recognition for those candidates and campaigns who have demonstrated compliance with the rules. The formation of an election committee to review complaints rather than leaving this as the sole responsibility of our city clerk is also a very good idea and allows for some needed space between our clerk and the campaigns. Suggesting any infractions be classified as a civil infraction versus criminal offense also makes sense and is a reasonable modification. Most of us are probably here because the most important issue is contribution limits. We all know money can corrupt, and politics is no exception. The influence of big money in politics undermines the public's interest. You have an opportunity to minimize this corruption by limiting the amount of money individuals or groups can contribute to council candidates. I encourage council to lower the suggested limit to well below the $1,000 that was recommended by the task force majority. The minority report suggests limits of $200 for individuals and $500 for groups. That will be much more effective in keeping the campaigns local and clean here in Longmont. Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry. Richard Juday?
I'm Richard Juday, live at 4042 Hawthorne Circle here in Longmont, and I will add my voice to the chorus that you have been hearing with respect to the campaign finance and operation report. The report, which I have read, is a very good start. I subscribe to the majority of its holdings, but there are some things that I would suggest that you would change to it. And this is an advisory document for you. It's not something that you have to take or leave. I would offer some axioms. First, that all citizens should have equal access to the process. The second axiom would be that clarity and openness of the process is a quintessential goal. The third axiom would be that the influence, the unwarranted influence of large contributions should absolutely be minimized. And fourth, that organizations are not natural persons, that the process should be run for the benefit of citizens, not for the benefit of organizations. And so I see no reason that an organization should be given a larger donation limit than a natural person would. So if you accept those axioms, there are some sequelae to them. First, I strongly back the minority opinion on the contributions in item 8. And I think that if $200 is good enough for electing a state representative, certainly that's good enough to as a limit for electing a council member. Some of my coffee buddies have said that if you lower the limit, all you're going to do is squeeze the money out into 527 groups. Well, okay, but 527 groups don't get to use the indicia that says Fair Campaign Longmont or whatever that it says. So the city should advertise that indicia heavily and prepare people to look for the Fair Campaign pledge that this ordinance would be going after. I particularly like item 8, that that documentation is mandatory and can be compelled. I would add language that clarity is the goal and that a piece of paper is not necessarily sufficient, and that an individual can challenge the level of detail. One notes recent events of where there's a $6,000 expenditure for consulting that's followed by a 527 group with no known contribution, no connection or interest in Longmont. It is a targeted mailing, and the clerk didn't question that detail. And I also would like to see all donations reported by Wednesday prior to the election, so that the voters can actually see who is contributing what. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Richard. Kay Fissinger.
Kay Fissinger, 2199 Creekside Drive. A considerable amount of time and thought went into developing the Election Task Force final report and recommendations. However, its majority failed to recognize the imperatives that underscore limits on campaign contributions. The recommended limit of $1,000 is tantamount to no contribution limit at all. It is simply wrong for individuals or groups with hefty bank accounts to be able to outspend a candidate or issue and effectively buy an election. It was asserted that, quote, the dollar amount a candidate receives is not necessarily important, but it may show the candidate or issue has widespread community support. Really? One contributor giving $1,000 is greater support than 10 contributors giving $100 each? The suggested $1,000 limit goes well beyond the $500 Colorado limit for governor and the $200 limits for state representatives and senators. The preponderance of contributions made to Longmont elections has been $100 or less. Our 2008 customer survey reveals that a majority of Longmont citizens support contribution limits. 83% strongly or somewhat agree. Further, 58% and 52% respectively support a $250 limit for individual contributions and for corporate, political committee, union, and business contributions. There is no reason for a contribution limit in excess of $250, and there is no reason to permit a business, corporation, political committee, or union to exceed the amount designated for Longmont individuals. Specificity is required in detailing expenditures of a committee. Those identified as fundraising and campaign consulting in particular should be itemized. A case in point is the $6,000 expenditure for consulting reported by Councilman Gabe Santos 30 days after the special election in January 2008. What activities did Communications Concept perform for Mr. Santos? Was any of this extremely large sum of money for a local campaign directed to another entity acting on his behalf? In January 2008 election, a 527 known as the Colorado League of Taxpayers mailed what can only be described as a hit piece against a candidate running for city council. There is no record of this group filing with the city of Longmont. 527s are required by law to reveal their contributors. I strongly recommend that city ordinance provide a mechanism for compelling any 527 that enters Longmont campaigns to reveal all that is required by law and severely sanction them for failing to report. This is a matter of good governance and should not be the burden of an individual candidate or issue campaign. The task force majority claims that limits would cause underground contributions through sources such as 527s. As just noted, this has already occurred, and the current absence of limits did not prevent it. I urge you to give serious consideration to the issues I've just raised, as well as to those I submitted in an email to you on Monday. Thank you.
Thanks, Kay. Padma Wick.
Good evening, Mayor Lang and City Council members. My name is Padma Wick, and I reside at 4213 Frederick Circle. In regard to the election reform being considered, I ask that you reject a limit of $1,000 and make 527 contributions more transparent. A $1,000 limit seems extraordinary compared to the $200 limit for State of Colorado representatives and senators, $500 limit for governor. Loveland, Fort Collins, and Boulder have limits of $75 to $100. These are tough times, and most folks will find it difficult to come up with extra money for political donations. It's a select few who will be able to afford as much as $1,000 for local elections. $1,000 donation limits favor those with money and power. What people are hungry for now is a government that responds to everyone, not just the wealthy and powerful. If there is to be private funding of candidates, then that funding should reflect a broad base rather than a select few. If a candidate has more money to spend, it should not mean that they have the wealthy contributors. It should mean that they have more supporters. The funding itself should be a way for people to have a sense of participation in the political process and make Longmont government a more perfect democratic system. 527s are required by law to reveal their contributions, and city ordinances should reflect that. Thank you.
Thanks, Padma. Chris Brannigan.
Chris Brannigan, 9 East 4th Avenue. Mayor, members of City Council, thank you for letting me address you tonight in support of backyard chickens. I'm sure I'm becoming familiar with everybody now because I am pretty devoted to this cause. As is my group that we've organized. We do have a Yahoo group, and we're becoming quite organized lately. We are very committed to addressing all the issues that people are bringing up in response to how chickens could affect neighborhoods and the community of Longmont. In efforts to address some of these, we have organized a education session at the library. That will be December 18th, I believe it's a Thursday at 7 p.m. So we do welcome the public. That is, it is being held by us. We're going to have guest speakers for 4-H. We're going to have a medical doctor addressing health concerns and answer questions anyone has. I'm not exactly sure. We're going to have some things on coop construction and code enforcement and how animal control-wise and code enforcement issues could come up and how they can be addressed with current ordinances or the ordinance that's being drafted now. So we are really actively trying to address these concerns. We feel strongly that this can work. It's worked in a lot of communities, and we're going to continue to push it and to educate people. The basis of all the fears are education, and we are happy to address that. That's one of the goals that we're happy to work on before the ordinance is passed and after the ordinance is passed. And like I said last time, we have already attacked the hurdle of a chicken rescue, so the Humane Society does not have the burden of that. So please bring on your challenges. We would like to address them and make this work. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Tom McCoy.
Tom McCoy, 27 Cornell Drive, and I would like to say to the council what a that I believe you're really doing a good job. All of you are working hard, and I think the community appreciates your efforts. And I think that the fact that you introduced a task force to work on campaign finance reform is really a top priority for the community, and it's interesting to see that the information is coming back. I kind of support the minority report in a lot of ways as far as numbers and the amounts are concerned. I think that the city and the city attorney's office needs to keep close track of the 527s and identify what these people are doing and what's going on there, because that's a big part of campaign finance reform. But I think the task force did a good job on the overall, and I think that you're going to have some good choices to make in the next 2 weeks as you come back with your final decision as far as an ordinance. Unfortunately, in 2000, we did pass an ordinance, and I was part of that council, and we had a criminal element in that part of that you have removed. And I think it's important that criminal part of that ordinance be taken out. So overall, I think, again, you people are doing a good job, and the citizens of Longmont appreciate your hard work. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Bob Cluster?
My name is Bob Cluster. I live at 812 Park Lane Avenue. I'm just here to speak on behalf of campaign contribution limits, and I don't think that I can add anything better than what was said in the minority report. It seems to me that if we have a limit of $500 per individual to elect the governor of this state, that it's really out of the ballpark to set a limit of $1,000 to elect a city council person. I mean, it's just kind of mind-boggling. I guess my what I want to focus my concerns on is this. When this task force was set up, it seems to me that it was fairly understood, at least by some subsequent instructions from council in one form or another, that council did expect there to be a recommended campaign contribution limitation, recommended. Yet when I read the language of the report, they said the majority of the task force members did not support contribution limits because they felt money will always influence politics and contribution limits will not change that. Clearly, the majority of the people on this task force are hostile to the idea of placing limits on campaign contributions. They equate it with free speech, which it is not. And I think it goes right to the heart of the matter. We know that people from the outset were opposed to campaign contributions from the very outset when they were appointed to the committee, even though they were not supposed to have made their mind up. We know that because they say many hours of passionate and thoughtful debate went into the group's recommendations. Well, you can't have passion and thoughtful debate if people don't come in with different points of view. And I would say that the majority of the people on the task force had already made their minds up that they were going to torpedo the idea of campaign contributions. And they got themselves on the committee by keeping their mouths shut until they got on the committee to work. So my point is that it'd be like if you appointed a committee to make the streets, to make traffic safer and make the streets safer, and you appointed people that didn't believe in speed limits. And one of the charges to this group would have been, what are the recommended speed limits in the residential areas? Well, these people don't say anything except once they get on the committee, they said, speed limits don't slow traffic down. We're opposed to that. Therefore, it's the same analogy. In good conscience, those people who went into that committee and had their mind made up against campaign contributions should have excused themselves from that committee in good conscience.
Thanks, Bob. Chris Boardman?
Good evening, Chris Boardman, 1512 Left Hand Drive. And I have a little more of the same for you regarding the election task force recommendations. On the contribution limits, I'm in general agreement with the minority opinion that the $1,000 limit per contributor is too high. I think that with the $1,000 limit, it will be easier for special interests and outside groups to buy the election. All it takes is a few donations of $1,000 to add up to real money. One argument in favor of higher limits or no limits is that there has been no evidence of corruption in past elections in Longmont. But I'm afraid that we're going to define corruption out of existence by effectively making it legal to buy the election. If you look at our national elections, we have a system where many candidates are bought and paid for by corporate lobbyists and special interests and their PACs. This system is designed so that a candidate from a third or fourth party has almost no chance of getting elected. The trouble is that this system is legal, so there's no evidence that it's corrupt. Everybody knows it is corrupt, but there's no evidence because no law is broken. It's legalized corruption. I don't want to see that same situation in our local elections. A $1,000 contribution limit is better than no limit, but is still excessive considering the scale of our elections. It is likely that a small group of big donors will be able to bury the opposition every time. So I think a limit of $100 or $200 per contributor is more appropriate. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Ruby Bowman.
Mayor Lang, council members, Ruby Bowman, 1512 Left Hand Drive. I have several concerns regarding campaign contribution limits and itemization of campaign expenditures. I strongly believe that the contribution limit should be $100. In past elections, there has been an infusion of campaign contributions into the campaign coffers of certain candidates from the home builders and real estate PACs. It appeared at times as if these outside groups were trying to buy a seat on council. This needs to end. I believe a $100 campaign contribution limit is appropriate and will keep outside special interests from having a greater voice in our elections than the average citizen. In addition, I believe candidates should be required to itemize their expenditures in greater detail on the report of contributions and expenditures. In the past January election, one candidate reported an expenditure of $6,000 for a local business to do consulting. I believe there should have been a detailed explanation of this expenditure, since consulting can encompass a broad range of services. For all I know, the $6,000 was funneled to an outside political organization in order to finance a pink poison pen campaign letter. Also, if the campaign contribution money goes to a local business and that business in turn hires a public relation firm to do the work, then the public has the right to know who the subcontractor is. Information such as the subcontractor's business name, address should be made public. This will at least expose whether campaign contributions are being funneled to political organizations, particularly if they are from outside of Longmont. There should be transparency in the election process so that the public knows where campaign contributions have come from and how they are being spent. Let's keep our election process free of political corruption. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruby. Dwayne Lees.
Good evening, members of council. My name is Dwayne Lease. I live at 2686 Pearl Howlett Road, Longmont, Colorado. I'm going to talk about the election reform stuff that's going on. Number one, the ability to rule, the power to rule, comes from the individual. It is only when that governance is acceptable to the individuals that they turn over that power to govern themselves. Groups are not individuals. There should be no contributions from groups, period. If those groups want to go out and advertise and do various kinds of things in favor of one particular candidate, then they should have to have some kind of public notification on whatever that advertisement is. And they should also tell who is contributing to that particular piece that's going in. So as a person reads the actual advertisement, they can see that it's from Lyft, a group of highly organized businesses that want to manipulate and move the election in a direction. But the people who are reading it will know that that's what it is. And it's like when the election, the board of realtors, we don't know when that actually happens who those people are. And so when they come here looking for rezoning, you don't know where that money came from because it came from the realtors. The realtors never come before the council for rezoning. So let's just have contributions from individuals. If the other people want to do things, and 527 is the same deal. You should have, every 527 should have to say who donated, who contributed to this particular hit piece. And that did happen in the last election. There's a reason why there's election reform for financing right now. Is because there have been some egregious behavior where people are buying the elections. I can speak of some other elections that occurred not too far away where $27 per vote, positive vote, was spent. $27. And that's what you can see. Now, the things you can't see, you don't know. But let's keep it to individuals. Only individuals can run for office. Only individuals can vote. Only individuals can contribute. If a group wants to do some advertising, then they have to, in the advertisement, say who they are and who the people are who are behind that organization and that group right in the ad. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dwayne. Strider Benston.
Hey, Strider Benston, 1027 Terry Street. I live here in Longmont. I find it very interesting that Longmont, this task force, considers itself so highfalutin as to be above the governor and actually in range of the elections for the President of the United States. I know when the preliminary report came in September, there was a suggestion of a $2,500 limit, and that got sent back to committee. I appreciate the work of the task force on all the jots and tittles. There were a lot of problems in the previous law that did not provide enough scrutiny, and it seems that many of those pieces have been covered, but not the question of the 527s to a certain extent. And I attended a number of those meetings, and I never heard any discussion about a group, about groups as opposed to individuals. I tend to support Dwayne and Richard, who's talked about the nature of a group, and it seems to be basic that would be the case. Only individuals can vote, only individuals should be able to contribute. But the point is we want local and clean elections here in Longmont, and if you look at the name of the group, it says Fair Campaign Act. There is no such thing as Fair Campaign Act when some people who can afford to put in $1,000 2 or 3 of those, and you've got a whole bunch of ads that the other person, anyone else, does not have any chance for. The idea of running for council is to show you have certain support in the community, and you need to go out there and get that support or elicit it or show that there is some. One of the things I was told by members of the task force is that, well, we can't have a serious limit because then they'll channel everything underground through the 527s. Well, if they're going to do underground, they're going to do underground stuff anyway if they're going to do that. The point is we need to have scrutiny over those. I will support, as I spoke almost a year ago, And apparently that was the reason I was not invited to be a member of the task force, because I had stated my opinion that I do want basic and reasonable campaign limits, and I would say $100 is a reasonable limit. If the minority says 200, I would be willing to compromise up to there, but basically I think $100 makes sense, and that's what real people could actually come up with, 50 or 100. And if you look at the results of the contributions from the last special election, you just see one is based $50 or less, and the others are $100 or more. And that determined the outcome of the election. Thank you.
Thanks, Strider. Anybody else wish to talk to us? Way in the back, way in the back. Yeah, no, Nick, you can only speak once, so I'm sorry. Yeah. Good. All right.
Mayor, City Council, George Marksmiller, 725 Fordham Street, Longmont, Colorado. I didn't really mean to talk tonight. However, I felt I needed to. As you're aware, Mayor, you've been subpoenaed to come to Small Claims Court on Monday next week to testify into the fact that the city has taken my property. Gordon Pedro, you've been subpoenaed to come to court on Monday next week, and you will be there, I hope. Dale Rademacher, you've been subpoenaed to come to court for small claims on Monday next week, and I'm sure you'll be there. This council has taken an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. Governments cannot take private property for public use without just compensation. That's what we're going to find out on Monday. I've been here before. I've asked you to correct situations on my property that I believe are safety issues, health issues, and pollution issues. You've refused to do it for the last 18 months. Hopefully, on Monday, we will find out if, in fact, the city is liable for what they have done. I've only asked this court to see that the city of Longmont has taken 200 square feet of my property, when in fact they have taken 29,000 square feet of my property. I didn't want to do this. I'll apologize to you, Mayor. I know you have more things to do on Monday than come to this small claims court. You have left me no alternatives. Ms. Banker's been out there. She's seen the property. She's seen if there are any situations that could be safety, health, or pollution issues. No response. Mr. Henson, you've been out there. You just tell me that it's like a sidewalk that I'm responsible for. I've asked the city to fix the fences. I've asked the city to put up safety, health signs to protect the citizens of Longmont. No response. I do have a myriad of responses from the city. I will show them to the court on Monday. Hopefully they will find in my situation. If they don't, I will appeal, and the city will pay for what they have done to me. The city will say that you bought the property with this easement on it, and that is true. But the city's responsibility to the citizens, I'm sorry. I'll see you in court on Monday. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Anybody else? Yeah, Richard.
Rich Hansen at 1716 Gifford Drive. I really didn't intend on speaking tonight, but I did want to mention the universal health care meeting that is going to be at the library this Saturday. And there's some extremely good speakers that are going to be there, and I did leave a flyer on your desk there. Barry Keene is an excellent, excellent speaker. And there is a medical doctor that is going to be there, and he is very, very good and very knowledgeable about all the issues. In terms of, I just wanted to make you aware of that. The other thing, in terms of the finance reform, I have mixed feelings about that. From one standpoint, I think the limit of $1,000 is too high. But I think we all know that money has a way of finding its way into politics some way or another. And I don't know that you can legislate that. The good news is, I think the landscape is changing, that the public is much more informed than they used to be. Their sources of information, they don't rely on the local newspaper. They don't rely on the 3 television networks. There's many, many sources of information out there, and the general public is much, much more aware of the issues both locally and nationally than they used to be. And I don't think politics as usual works. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
Could I comment,
Yeah, Councilmember Blue.
Mr. Hanson?
Richard?
Excuse me, but I don't know if you're, turn it on. I don't know if you're aware, but all of us are involved in interviews for our boards and commissions at the exact same time as this, so you will not assume that if we're not there that we're not interested, okay?
I understand that,
Okay.
and I wasn't aware of that, but I understand that there's a lot of other things going on and a lot of things that people are doing, so I understand that. I'm hoping that 1/4 of the people that see this information will show up.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Yes, Mr. Rodriguez.
Mayor and members of council, Chris Rodriguez, 1265 Button Rock Drive. I didn't plan on coming, but I got a phone call today from a large contributor, somebody that contributed quite a bit to the campaign. And they were concerned about the limits on organizations, corporate, political committee, union. And the idea he floated to me, which I haven't heard, I didn't see in the communication, which I thought was pretty interesting. Not sure how I feel about it yet, but it's interesting. Is a cap, like a spending cap on like sports teams. An $8,000 limit is all you can raise, no more. And so everybody has to stop at the same point. Instead of starting at 0 with low limits, just get what you can get up to 8,000 and no more. And that's all you can spend, that's all you can collect. Everything after that point, you have to turn away. That was from the Fraternal Order of Police, by the way. It wasn't from the Realtors Association. So I just want to pass that along. Mike Violette wanted me to, he had some really good ideas, but he couldn't make it tonight, so I want to pass it on to all of you about that. There was something in the election committee communication that I thought was a little troublesome, especially for me personally and other people. The election committee will have the power to compel documents and people to appear before it. Now, this is really dangerous because the thing that's been brought up a few times tonight was a mailer that was put out. My name, or my website name, was on it. I had nothing to do with it. A quote was on it. I did not write that quote. I have pretty good control over what I say, what I do, and I don't make many mistakes when it comes to these kind of things. Well, my name, my website name was on it. I had nothing to do with it. So if this committee decides that they're going to go after that 527, which, fine with me. I had nothing to do with it. I didn't give any money. I don't know even who they are. But my name was on that. So I could be subpoenaed. I could be brought forward to some committee that thinks I have something to do with something I have nothing to do with. When all of us are public people, we all speak all the time. I write, I speak. If I have an opinion about something, I don't want to be subpoenaed in front of a committee because of my opinion, because I say, this person, I don't like what they did here, or this person, I think they did a good job here, you should elect them, right? If my comments are taken probably out of context, or in this case, it was taken from somebody else, not me, I'm not going to be responsible for what other people do with my words or misusing my website. As far as contribution limits, I'm not going to waste much time on that because it sounds like I'm getting the impression that the minority opinion is going to be the majority vote. I might be wrong. I hope I'm wrong because unlike some of the people that have spoken tonight, I'm not going to say the election task force, thank you, you did a good job, but I'm going to say thank you for a good job. I'm not going to throw in these caveats about, oh, I didn't like you did here, you all had an agenda here, and this, that, and I'm not going to pick it apart because I wasn't there every week. I was there once. I wish I could have been there more, but I didn't have time. I know a lot of the people in this room weren't there either. So I want to thank the committee. I think you did a great job, and I wish I could have been there more. And as far as publicly funded campaigns, just one last word on that. 73% were strongly or somewhat disagreed with it in the city survey. 27% strongly or somewhat agreed with it. So I hope that's not ignored. And again, I want to thank the task force and city council for your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Anybody else? Yes?
Council members, thank you. My name is Mickey Hand. I live at 1674 Stardance Circle. I had intended to say a little bit more today, but I'll just keep it very brief. I wanted to come today to encourage City Council to support the upcoming ordinance to allow Longmont residents to keep a limited number of hens in the backyard. I think it's a very hotly debated issue. I think generally that the concerns of those opposed are related primarily to the idea of large-scale poultry raising. Basically, I feel very strongly that a few hens in the backyard would be as innocuous as a backyard garden and compost pile. Those of us who are wishing to keep chickens have only good intentions, I think. I think we're actually a fairly small group. I think overall this issue is going to burn hotly and briefly. I encourage you to pass it and just get it done with. You'll make a lot of people happy, you'll make some people unhappy, and then in 6 weeks, everyone will have forgotten about it, and we will be like Fort Collins that has an ordinance that allows you to keep chickens, and we'll all be under the law. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mickey. Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public invited to be heard. And we're on to election task force report.
Mayor Valerie will introduce it, and then various speakers will take their turn.
Okay.
Yeah, either side. Mayor Lang and members of council, I'm Valerie Skid. I'm Director of Administration and City Clerk, and I'm going to give you a brief overview of the information. And but before we do that, I would like to introduce to you all of the dedicated and very hardworking people that are sitting before you right now that have spent months working on some of these recommendations that are coming before you. So our task force members from this down this way is Marilyn Hughes and Marcy White, Chris Kaleli, Doug Brown, Paul Tiger, Leona Stacker, Linda Champion, and also council members Levison and council member Santos. And I do have to say it's been my privilege to work with this group. They did spend a lot of vigorous debate on many of these issues, and I think they hashed out both sides, or even sometimes more than two sides, to some of the most controversial issues that are in here, and also came to consensus on a great deal of the information and recommendations that are before you. They began meeting in May and met twice a month through July, and then stepped it up and started meeting weekly after that, from August through November. And a second subcommittee of this group also worked at the same time weekly on the definitions that were included in these recommendations. They agreed right from the start that they probably wouldn't be able to reach consensus on everything, and so agreed to include minority opinions on those items where consensus was not reached, and that task force members might have a strong desire to have council hear the other side of the viewpoint that was not the committee's recommendation. They utilized a variety of research and reference materials. The entire list is in your packet. It's also been on the website, and all of those materials and their minutes and agendas have been on the website throughout the entire process so that the public could review that as the work progressed. One of the primary references that they used was a Writing Reform 2008 Revised Edition, which was published by the Brennan Center for Justice at the New York University School of Law, and they are recognized as one of the foremost authorities on campaign finance laws in the nation, and had most up-to-date court cases and rulings on campaign finance across the nation. The recommendations in the report are divided into 7 categories to try and bring some order to the many recommendations that are coming forward. In all, the task force has recommended 7 changes to reporting requirements for candidates and issue committees, 10 miscellaneous changes to the Fair Campaign Practices Act around various sections. We're not going to review each one of those individually. They were in your report. We're assuming you've looked those all over. They are recommending an election committee be formed primarily to provide advice on election and campaign finance issues, to hear allegations regarding violations, those that are brought forth both from the city clerk or from a member of the public, and to consult on future code changes that may be required. As you have heard tonight, and this committee expected, the most controversial recommendation in the report is the contribution limit, that the task force has brought forth a recommendation of a $1,000 limit. There is a minority opinion included in that, and was also included on the presentation that you saw, pre-recorded presentation, and I'm sure a lot of the discussion will center around that. So we'll get to that in a bit. There were also 15 different areas for sanctions that this group chose to call out for specific violations, so that there was some consistency in how those sanctions would be interpreted by an election committee if that recommendation is approved. There were also 19 new or updated definitions for clarity, and also new definitions that weren't included in the original Fair Campaign Practice Act. They have one recommendation on publicly funded campaigns, and I'm going to talk about that just briefly. We are not going to go recommendation by recommendation, but we're certainly willing to discuss any of them that you would like to. The one addition to the material that wasn't on your presentation, and also I need to make a comment about the publicly funded campaigns. The topic came up on many occasions during the discussions, but the task force decided to put off any detailed discussion of that till the end, because they felt their primary purpose was to update the existing Fair Campaign Practices Act. They did spend one full meeting in November discussing the issue, and there was not strong support from the task force, at this time anyway, for creating a publicly funded campaign program for candidates. They did feel that the council would be better served by creating a separate group to work on that if they wanted to explore the issue further. The one recommendation on the issue from this task force, and it was a unanimous recommendation with one member absent, was that any final decision about a publicly funded campaign program should go to a vote of the Longmont citizens, that it shouldn't just be an initiated ordinance. It can be an ordinance initiated by council, but it should be voted on by the public. So before we open it for discussion, if there are other comments from this group that they would like to make, I do just want to again say how dedicated they were, and I've never seen a group, and almost every meeting they were all there, so they were very dedicated and hardworking. Anybody on the committee have something they would like to say? Yeah, I think you worked just harder than all. So, that's okay.
Let me just ask if Gabe or Sarah have anything to say before we get into the dialogue. You're part of the committee, and anybody else that wants to talk, but do you have any initial comments?
Well, I think that one of the remarkable things about working with this group is that in the beginning of the report, you saw that we were striving to have the most kind of diversity of opinions in the room as possible. And that's why there were minority reports coming out on several of these issues. And unlike some members of the public, you know, my assumption was that people were not going to be predisposed. Whether or not people just had their a continuing opinion on that was a personal point of view, part of the reason why we had that diversity of points of view is that we wanted to make sure that no voices were excluded in this process, because elections are about the most important part of democracy. And you don't want to exclude anybody from that conversation. So I may not agree with all the recommendations of the committee. However, I do appreciate each and every person's dedication. And I especially want to call out those who worked on definitions. Linda Champion, Marcy White, Paul Tiger, and Marilyn Hughes, and myself. We did a lot of head-banging sessions for 2.5 hours on Monday afternoons, and working on those definitions gave me a greater appreciation for what our city attorney's office must go through to write code. So I would also like to appreciate publicly the heavy lifting that the attorney's office is going to be doing on getting this ordinance into shape. So I'd also like to recognize every other member of the task force, former Mayor Stacker, former council member Doug Brown, and Chris Colelli. You all contributed greatly to the conversation, and I do appreciate all the work and time everyone put in. I also want to acknowledge Gabe's participation as well. I know he had to make some time in his schedule to participate in this process, and it was very gratifying for me as a council member to get him to accept and make that time commitment to this work. So thank you, Gabe.
Councilmember Santos.
Thank you, Mayor Lang. Well, I would like to thank you all. We had, as Valerie said, that we were there, a good majority of us were there for the entire time. Some of us had to go out of town. Some of us that went out of town actually called in. And Chris, I really appreciate you taking that time of dedication and while you were in Virginia to call in and be a part of the discussions for an hour to 2 hours to sometimes 2.5 hours. So I really appreciate it. While, you know, as Sarah said, there are some things that, you know, I don't agree with either in this report. But you know what? It was hammered out by everyone in this group, some pretty easily, some pretty passionately. But we all, when we left the room, we all respected each other, thanked each other for the hard work that we did, and I really appreciate the hard work that you have done. With that, Sarah, it was, you know, a lot of fun working with you, and was it really fun? It was a lot of fun.
Honesty now.
Honestly, it was a lot of fun. Like I said, we all went in there. Of course, everyone goes into a situation with preconceived notions. You try to check them at the door and try to have an open mind and listen to what other folks have to say, because sometimes they will have that idea that you didn't think of, and that's how progress is made, and that's, I think, that is in this report. So, thank you, Sarah, and that's pretty much all. And Valerie, thank you very much. There were some times when, you know, we were pretty hot and heavy, and you brought us back to where we needed to be. And thank you for your mediation and actually leadership at times to get us back on track.
Councilmember Levinson.
And I think we forgot to recognize Michelle Waite, who came in and worked with us as well, the staff member from the senior center, one time when Valerie couldn't be there. The other thing I would like to begin the conversation with the rest of the council and couch this in that with the individual recommendations aside, one of the purposes as a public policy issue to look at campaign finance reform is really that we're looking for this revamping of the ordinance to last not just the next election cycle, but several election cycles. And with that, one of the things that the committee didn't really discuss, but was very much stressed in the reform writing guidelines from the Brennan Center, is that one of the ways and the reasons to do your ordinance in the most thoughtful manner, and again, following some of those tips in Brennan, will actually save your city a lot of aggravation and a lot of cost. Following the suggestions in Brennan on crafting reform, if you do it correctly and set your limits and make your definitions conform to standard practice, you will save the city from tens of thousands of dollars worth of possible challenges to your ordinance. And I think primarily my concern and the reason why I signed on to that minority report with the contribution limits is that I strongly feel that the contribution limits will set at $1,000 will absolutely make this ordinance a target for a group maybe with not so much funding to shoot down the entire ordinance. And I think that that would really be a disservice to the city and frankly may not leave us with much in the way of code to go by. So I just wanted to say to the council not only to take the long view on the contribution limits, but also to consider the fact that the Brennan Center also recognizes that public financing is a part of the contribution limit discussion, and also that public financing, where it may not have been indicated in our initial question ever on a customer service satisfaction survey, is something that more than half the states in the United States are considering at the state level, and has been met with very great success recently in Connecticut in the first ever statewide election to use public financing. 63% of their candidates use public financing. So I think that we have to take the long view. Part of the long view is the public policy issue to close the circle on the ordinance, and public financing truly is that piece. And is something that I believe pretty shortly the state of Colorado is going to be considering. So for us to be ahead of the curve on some of these issues, and rather than behind it, I think would be something I would encourage council members to take a second look at.
Councilmember Blue?
Thank you. My son was here last week. He tells me I don't speak into the mic well enough, so I hope I'm not blasting you out. Thank you to all of you. When I realized the hours that you have spent on this task, I was very, very impressed and very appreciative for the citizens of Longmont. And when I first saw the report in our packet, I thought, why are they going into all this detail? But in support of Sarah's comment about how this is going to be a lasting document and how the detail hopefully will protect the city in the long run, I really appreciate all the work you did. I have a question about the so-called trademark, the indicia, is that how you say it? Indicia. Okay. Is that something that, I understand that would come from the city clerk's office, and it would sort of say, this group has checked in with us and has the stamp of approval, if you will, to work in this campaign in some way. Is that a permission that, Valerie, that you have to get from the Secretary of State's office?
Mayor Langham and Councilmember Blue, no, we don't need permission from the Secretary of State's office to create our own indicia. We're a home rule community, and the Secretary, well, the state recognizes that we can adopt our own campaign regulations and do not regulate that.
So you'll just figure out some little symbol that you will use?
That's the
forever?
plan. It's the plan if the recommendation is accepted.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councilmember McCoy?
Thank you, Mayor Lang. I would first like to thank all of you for your hard work and dedication. I think the community appreciates this, and I know that there's several members that have run for office of this committee and have had the misfortune of having the criminal elements placed on them, and I think it's high time we get rid of that. You guys have done an excellent job. Thank you, because that is a time that we're in a time that we need to stop doing that, especially when we really don't have criminals standing in front of us. We have good, hardworking people that either were just late by a couple of minutes or some other issue like that. So I think we really do, as a community, appreciate that. I wanted to address Mr. Rodriguez's issue. He mentioned that about keeping like $8,000, and I thought that was a really good idea too, Chris. You came up with an excellent idea there, and I know you got that from Mike Violette, and he talked to me too. But I then spoke to Councilmember Levinson and asked her about that and asked some questions, and she explained so that the rest of the community understands that it just comes down to is that that situation has been tried in the courts, if I understand correctly, and if there's a member of the committee who'd like to chime in, that it won't hold up in the courts. And so as logical and obvious as that sounds to so many of us out there in the community, and how to really try to curb some of these things from occurring, unfortunately, we don't want to start down a path that we know that is already lost in the courts. So I know we want to have the best ordinance that we possibly can. So all of you worked hard. The one thing that I wanted to make a comment on is I noticed how we kind of separate out an individual and a group. Whether that group is a company, a corporation, association, or other, I think they all should be equal. And I appreciate that we shouldn't have a tiering of what we should have here is in contributions when we discuss limits. We ought to make sure that a corporation is on paper a individual, but that's it. That's where it ends. And so I think we need to think of that as a one entity. Now, whether that is something that other members will agree on, I don't know as of yet, but I would like to keep that as equal for equal, because an individual for an individual. And so that's my stance. And then another issue is that if we do have contribution limits, I really think it needs to also entail in kind. And I know you've talked a little bit about that, and I just want to reiterate my position on this, that if we were to go with any one of the limits that is identified here, it would be really important to me to say that we have, that if it were $1,000, that it would be $1,000 in kind contributions, because that means that if you don't want to give cash in the form of a check, you can give services, but they have to be entailed with a document contract showing that that's what it costs, and it needs to be comparative to what is being charged elsewhere. I mean, for other work that is done. Not that we're cutting out the labor or some other component, the paper or whatever issue that somebody wants to say they cut out, and that makes it even a little bit more of a contribution. So that's one area that I'm interested in looking at. I myself think that the minority opinion in regards to the $200 level is perfectly adequate, considering looking at the past elections. That's pretty consistent with past elections, and so I would like to keep it at that. So that's where I'm going to be coming in on this issue, so people understand where I'm coming from. So again, I want to thank you for your hard work. I want to let you all know how much I appreciate it, and thank you for your time.
Valerie, let me kind of put some clarity in the process. Are you going to do use a PowerPoint at all for the? Okay, so for the viewing public, they won't see anything in the way of PowerPoint. Now,
Plan to.
okay, and that's fine. I just want to make sure what we are going to do and what we're not going to do. What I'd like to do, just to start off, is would you just go through the 7 recommendations and tell us and tell the public, you don't need to expand on them, but exactly what the 7 recommendations are that came out of the committee?
There's more like 27 recommendations. There's 7 just for reporting requirements.
Okay.
So.
All right, well, let's talk about the 7.
Okay.
If you could just tell us what they are, and maybe they are on the PowerPoint that we have, the overview.
They aren't all on the PowerPoint. What you saw in the PowerPoint presentation on the pre-recorded session were just the primary recommendations out of this group, but there's many more than what they covered in that presentation. So I'll be glad to quickly go through those if that's
Would
what
you
you'd
do
like
that?
to do. Sure. In terms of changes to reporting requirements for candidate and issue committees, the group is recommending 1 report of contributions and expenditures be provided by groups involved in a petitioning process 30 days after their petition receives approval as to form from the city clerk. And then, of course, once it makes the ballot, they would be under the other the regulations of the Fair Campaign Practices, the other reporting requirements.
So that's changes in reporting requirements to improve transparency, basically.
Right.
Okay.
One that does not currently exist.
All right.
The second one was to require an additional report on the 14th day before the election. There are currently 3 reports required. Most other jurisdictions require 4 reports. This also gives us more information earlier in this in the process for mail ballot elections.
Okay.
The deadline for all reports will be the close of business if that change is made. Candidates not taking contributions or spending any money will be required to file what we call a 0 report, or file a report. That has been the intent of the ordinance, but during the last election, that was called into question whether it was clear.
Okay.
Okay.
Hang on just a minute, Councilmember Banker.
Before we go too much farther, Valerie, I've got a couple of questions. The last one that you just talked about, if a particular candidate is not taking any contributions, there is an assumption by some that then they don't have to fill out any reporting, any of the reports that might be required. What's the communication then between a candidate that's running that's spending $0 in your office? Are you going to make an effort to contact them and let them know? Because again, unless you come to the city clerk's office and get all this information, I think there's just an assumption if you're not going to raise money, you don't have to file reports.
And just for your information, we always have contacted every candidate because, one, we don't know whether they're raising contributions or spending any money. So we contact every candidate and require a report refiled. And so we have always done that. We're just clarifying the language that makes it clear for them that they have to do it. So we're not going to really change our practice. Sometimes we call them 2 and 3 times before.
That's good. Because I just want to make sure that, for someone who's not done this before, I just want to make sure that they understand the rules that are set in place and they're not taken by surprise and then they don't fall into a category later that you're going to be talking about in terms of fines and fees. And then one other question. It looks as though then the committee has decided to eliminate the filing that normally comes the Wednesday before an election?
No, that would still be required.
That would still be there. So you're adding a new
Fourth
report?
one, right.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead.
Continue. Late filing of reports, as you're aware, we're asking that all violations be civil violations. So this was one we specifically talked about should not have a criminal offense associated with it. We're also indicating that there will be a sanction for late filing, and that would be paid at the window when they actually file their report rather than later. Right now it's collected through the court, but they could file that at the window. And candidates and committees should be allowed to file their reports electronically. Currently, we don't have a system for that. We'll need to set one up, but we can do that.
Oh, okay.
If a candidate has an existing open committee from a previous election, the group is recommending that the candidate file a contribution expenditure report within 5 days after announcing their candidacy for the next election to bring that report up to date through that time period.
Okay.
Okay. Open committees requiring that they file twice in off-election years rather than once. One at 6 months outside of the election and one year after the election.
Okay.
Candidates and issue committee agents, we are recommending that they be able to produce the piece of paper that shows the business transaction, whether it's been paid for or not, because most times there's a purchase order, either an estimate or something. We're not, the group is not recommending that they submit all those receipts, but that they be able to provide them within 24 hours of a request from the city clerk.
Okay.
Okay. So in terms of miscellaneous provisions, once again, all violations, they're recommending that they be decriminalized, that they be civil violations. For independent expenditures, this group is recommending that the threshold for reporting independent expenditures be lowered from the current $1,000 level to $100, and that those be cumulative. So if you spent $5 here and $10 there, that cumulatively, when you reach $100, you have to file the report. Candidates can make loans to their own committee. Currently, they've been allowed to do that. It's just not really clear in the election code how they do that. And so this just clarifies that language, and that if they don't get enough contributions to pay themselves back, then they just convert it to a contribution to the campaign.
Okay.
The next one has to do with council's direction to the city clerk has been to print in the paper the names of contributors of $100 or more to all of the campaigns from the reports. That has been happening, but it's not anywhere in the code, so let's just add clarifying language to make sure that people understand that. The language that requires reporting of contribution pledges would be eliminated. A lot of discussion around this. A lot of times pledged contributions never come in. And we will keep the reporting for pledged expenditures because those are usually a promise to pay. You've ordered something and you just haven't been billed for it. But contributions will be reported when they're received.
Okay.
Committee and candidates are required to deposit all funds in a timely fashion. Just needs, language isn't in there, but it needs to be added to the code. Candidates and issue committees must name one registered agent, which they currently are required to do. This committee felt like it was advisable to allow them to identify up to 3 additional agents who may be representing and speak on behalf of the candidate and can take campaign contributions.
Well, not really.
So,
Not necessarily. We want to talk about. How about that? I think what we want to talk about is those recommendations that we don't concur on, and spend our time discussing that, getting your input, and trying to drive to a consensus. So I guess I'm just pleading to be as productive as we can be. If you agree with what they came out with, let's not say anything about it. Let's spend our time on those things that we don't agree on. Doug, you got a...
Yeah, I don't know when you want us to speak.
So hang on one more second. We're just going to restart that mic real quick. Sorry.
And I'm going to answer your question, and maybe, well, you go ahead.
It's red? Okay. Mayor Lang, when do you want us to speak, and how do you want us to speak on issues tonight?
My
panel?
thoughts are, if we have an issue we want to talk, let's talk about contribution limits as an example. I'm sure we're going to get quite a bit of discussion.
We're ready.
Okay, but as we have questions or concerns or comments, you can feel free as a group, as individuals, to jump in and talk about that thing. What I would prefer, to kind of keep some order in the thing, if you want to make a comment, just raise your hand and I'll call you out, and try it that way. All I want to do is be orderly, be productive, and end up with some results. So, Doug, you got another comment?
Yes. There's been a lot said tonight on group contributions and limits on individuals. I don't have many comments on the individual limits. I personally find money the more odious part of being a candidate for office. But contrary to what some of the people said tonight and the public invited to be heard, I did not arrive at this committee with any preconceived notions about group limits. I had not thought about it at all. But as I thought about it, I tried to think of both sides of this. When a group gives money to a campaign and the public knows about it, they pretty well know what that group stands for and therefore understand what the candidate may stand for or be biased towards. So therefore, it gives them a cue to what the candidate stands for, more than just what he says. But the money that, where it comes from describes what he stands for. And so, you know, when the Board of Realtors give money, there are people who will say, a dirty word? Anyway, my mic went off. But anyway, if the Board of Realtors give money, a lot of people say, you know, I agree with their policies, so this candidate must be a pretty good guy. If the Fraternal Order of the Police give a great deal of money to an election, people will say, you know, I agree with that organization, and I'll vote for this guy. Or they may say, you know, I disagree with those policies, and will not vote for them. So this is a cue to the public to what a candidate stands for, more than just what they say or she or he says. And so that's the way I arrived at my opinion. I would rather not see any money in elections, but, you know, so there was a lot said, and the public invited to be heard, but I think the other side of the story should be given, and this is what I just did.
Okay. Just to follow up on Doug's comments, and I think initially we said, has anybody got any comments? And if you do have any comments now before we ask you questions about certain items, you're sure free to jump in. And if anybody wants to do that at this time, please feel free to do that. And if you don't, we will go ahead and start the dialogue.
Right.
So, no, the usual way. So,
I usually
Paul.
ask, and then he says I can queue up. Yeah, I'm sorry. Is it? There we go.
There you go.
Thanks. I was writing down some answers to questions that I heard council members asking out of what they'd heard from Valerie so far, and I thought I'd just quickly respond to some of those things. Sean, the gifts in kind is actually covered. And it's actually covered in definitions. There's a lot of things about definitions where it says what is a definition and then what is not. So a lot of the clarity comes in that area. Of course, you know, we spent a lot of time on that, and so I asked people to look at that. It may have moved from where you might have seen it before in declarations. Let's see. I don't think that we have any, Karen, I don't think that we've had any candidates who never reported. I think that they always report and file, thanks, and file a candidate report. I mean that they register as being a candidate. And when they register as being a candidate, they get a packet from the city that, and you essentially are signing a contract with the city that you're going to read this information and be responsible and do your things at the right time. What we have the difficulty with is the independent expenditures, and those are the people we don't know who they are, perhaps until we see something in the newspaper. And I think that pretty much is the two things that I heard. I kind of wanted to make the general comment that I'd heard before from the public invited to be heard, and that is that $1,000 is not a requirement. It's a limitation right now. You could give $1 million. There is no limitation. We've come down in price. But what happens is that if you look at the from past elections, what we find is that people, individuals, generally don't give more than $100. They usually give like around a nominal of $50. It's when we see $1,000 on the chart way out here, this peak, that what we're actually seeing is a group. And right now, groups can give $5,000, which we've seen, $5,000, $6,000. And so that was, we're not saying that it's a requirement.
I think we understand that.
Thank you.
Chris, you have a comment?
Councilmember Blue marveled at the detail in the report, and it's necessarily that way. We kind of found ourselves getting more detailed as we went, which is, I think, why we took a little more time. But it's because what the ordinance ultimately will be is an algorithm. It's algorithmic, it's deterministic, it's prescriptive. And when you start to alter our recommendations, as I think you might, think about, as you put the variables into the algorithm, how they trickle through and what happens, see what kind of output you get. Because if you change one thing in isolation, I think you're going to affect something else in a way that you didn't anticipate. For instance, looking at a campaign contribution limit only looks at how money comes in directly to a candidate. There are independent expenditures and there are 527s. The things that you might ideally like to demand of 527s to report or not participate or whatever, I think when you get to that point, you'll probably find out you're trying to write something that's unenforceable. Think of that, and I'm sure when the city attorney starts to write the ordinance, you'll be advised of really what the pitfalls are, and I think you'll recognize that the algorithm has its limits, that as you lower the limit, you will squish money to other places that you just can't prevent. So keep that in mind. People who talk about a contribution limit, say $500 for the governor, and equate that to City of Longmont campaigns, I think are putting forth a logical fallacy. I don't know what the Latin term for that particular fallacy is, but it's this: it's equating magnitudes where magnitudes don't equate. The governor has a whole state to draw from. So when you set the governor at $500, he's got 4 million people who can contribute. In the city of Longmont, if I look at the distributions from other campaigns, you know, they run from 10 contributions to 100. A candidate in Longmont just cannot get the magnitude of contributions that the governor has, even if the governor's limit is lower. So there's a fallacy in that argument. And Paul is right that a contribution limit is not a minimum price to participate. So lowering the limit doesn't make it easier for people to get in. They can already get in at $10, $25, and $50, whatever they want to put forth. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah, Marcy.
Yeah, Chris. Here we go again. This has been our favorite topic.
Sounds it'll be ours too.
Yeah, going back just to the governor part. A governor of the state needs more money to run. He's got more expenditures, more expensive expenditures than I assume a councilman will have. I don't see you guys advertising on television. You know, I think the most expensive thing you have is probably newspapers, right? And yard signs. But you're not going to need that kind of money that the governor has. He has a wider base to draw from, but he needs a wider base. In Longmont, if you have a wide base, it shows that more contributions from more people, I think actually shows a more viable candidate than a candidate who gets one or two large contributions and kind of sits around and nobody meets this candidate, has to look around to see what this candidate stands for. The candidate can put out what he wants, he can afford it. The people who are going door to door, having their volunteers go door to door, are actually interfacing with the citizens of Longmont, which I think is healthier. You get more people, you know, in your group. Let's see. That's about all I have to say right now.
Okay. Yeah, Linda.
Okay. This close enough. The committee's goal was to write ordinances, as was stated, that would declare transparency throughout the election process, and that truly, as we discussed it among ourselves, really was the bottom line. The majority of the committee felt that the $200 aggregate limit by individuals would indeed starve the system, as the candidate would have no recourse but to borrow money or take a loan to counter any 527 activity, which has been actively prevalent in the last 2 elections. Also, the cost of signs, pamphlets, and newspaper ads are increasing in cost. So as you are thinking about the $100 or the $200 limit, think about the candidate, and as Chris mentioned, he may get 10, 50 people that would give to his campaign, how can you run a campaign on $1,000 or $500? It would be very difficult. Also, the idea of the freedom of speech issue comes up from time to time. But the First Amendment protects freedom of speech, and the Supreme Court has ruled that campaign spending is a form of political advocacy. The discussion concerning corruption or the appearance of corruption would definitely raise its head if the limit were set too low, as independent expenditures and bundling, or large sums of small donations under $20 from undeclared sources would become more prevalent. And these are some of the reasons the committee has recommended the $1,000 limit.
Okay. Anybody else? Marilyn?
I don't know. Is this going to work? I think I'd like to mention a couple of things. I'd like to go to something that Sean brought up and Councilmember McCoy. Right? The purpose of a tiering system for individuals and groups, part of the reasoning behind that is in our study of campaign finance law while we went through this process. It did appear in the law that tiered systems held up better to challenges, that looking at individuals as opposed to groups held up better. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but that was the reasoning behind the minority report to look at a tiered system. We felt like it was important to look at what the court cases were telling us. I'd like to go to the freedom of speech idea. I think that what the Supreme Court was talking about was expenditures, that you can't limit expenditures. Then you're limiting freedom of speech. But they weren't talking about contribution limits. And in fact, at least one of the justices had a really great quote, which I can find here easily. Basically, if you want to limit contributions, you need to have findings to support that. And we felt like we did have findings based on the, basically looking at all where contributions fell in the last few years. I think in your appendices, you've probably seen the graphs with where it showed where all the contributions fell. And when you're looking at contribution limits from $200 to $500, you're picking up something like 95% of the contributions. You're not starving the system. That's another word that you'll hear, because the system is showing you already that that's where most contributions fall. What you're taking out are outlier contributions that are far off the majority. So I just want to throw that in.
You mentioned the tiered system. Let me just ask you a follow-up since you brought it up. As far as a contribution limit of $1,000 in the recommendation that came out, is that for individuals and groups?
I believe the majority said it was across the board.
Okay, I just want a clarification.
And there's no question.
Soon as we get through here, Mary, giving everybody a shot. So, is that it, Marilyn?
Yeah.
Anybody else from the committee want to say anything before we turn this council loose? Leona, you haven't
Well,
talked.
the only comment about the 527s, the city cannot legally control 527s. So that really is out of the picture. And we know that they have been very involved, so I think we need to clarify that. That money can come in regardless of what the limits that you set.
Okay.
But I'd like to add, just as mentioned in the public invited to be heard, they were getting involved before we had any limits at all.
Exactly.
So I don't think that's a good argument, a logical argument to say we shouldn't have limits, because there'll be more 527
Okay.
involvement.
All right. Did you have one other thing, Marcy?
Oh, I was just going to add that with 527s, generally, the main reason for their existence is not because of any kind of limits. It's to shield the donors.
Okay. So we've got quite a queue. Doug, one more, and then we're going to let some of these council people.
If you put a limit on groups, the money will be given by individuals in that group, and they will not be identified with issues like the group is. So therefore, if the groups can give money, then the candidate can be identified by the public by issues. Whereas you give it by individuals, who knows the individuals? Unless you know them personally, you don't know why they're given the money.
Okay. Councilmember Hanson.
Thank you, Mayor Lang. I want to thank the committee for all the hard work and dedication you put into this. I honestly think this will be one of the most important issues that City Council has to decide because, you know, we represent all the citizens in the city of Longmont, and anytime we get biases in our election, then it makes it hard for us to represent all the citizens in the city. I think that this is probably one of the greatest challenges to fair democracy in this country, the way our elections are currently financed. And if you want to see how people will vote, you can very often predict how our representatives will vote by just seeing where their money came from, which I think is very unfortunate, but it's in fact true. And I hope that at the city council level we don't see much of that, but that's the reason why we're doing this, is so that our votes aren't biased in any way because of the way we receive our money. I have to personally admit that I remember all the contributors and the amount that they gave if it was $100 or more, and I remember almost all the contributors below $100, but I don't remember the amount that they contributed. And I think this is fairly important because when you remember the amount of money that somebody contributes or a group contributes, it has a tendency of biasing your vote. I hope it doesn't bias my vote, but I think when you receive money from somebody, there's always that tendency of having your vote biased by that group. And I do understand some of the issues with some of the money that we can't control coming in through 527s, et cetera. But I would like to see the contribution limits kept as low as possible so that, and I would even throw out $99, and the reason for it is those are the ones that I don't remember the numbers. You know, I could be wrong about that number, but, you know, I think it's the large, if someone contributes $1,000 to your campaign, you're going to remember that number. And when an issue comes up that they're very concerned about, you're going to tend to be biased, and that really concerns me. And I realize there's 527s, we can't control the money, but we usually know what their motives are and what they're up to. So although I know there's elements out there that we can't control, I don't think we should stop that from putting reasonable limits on individual contributions and in-kind contributions and any kind of contributions that we can. I think the other thing that really concerns me too when we have these high contribution limits for individuals is it really excludes the lower income from having influence over the government. You know, when we have real high limits, it just says, well, the only people that can have a lot of influence over the votes through money, if it influences the candidate, which I hope it doesn't influence someone when they're in office, but if it does, it basically sends a message out there that if you have a lot of money, you can have more influence than if you don't. And it does exclude a lower income group. And that really concerns me a great deal. I don't think it should be preferentially influenced by those people that have more money. I guess my biggest concern is some of the dangers of the limits, you know, are such as 527s or someone that can contribute a lot of money personally or other ways that they can contribute much larger sums of money that we can't control. And then it doesn't allow it to be countered by individual contributions because we put limits on that. So I think that's my biggest concern. But you know, I don't know what we can do about that. I don't know if there's anything, I'm curious, as a home rule city, do we have any exemptions from some of the statutory issues that we're dealing with the 527s or other larger aggregate funding? I really don't know. I'd be interested to know if there's anything that makes us exceptional or different in that regard. But I would say that I would like to keep the individual contributions down to about $100 for both in-kind and for individual contributions.
This may be a little out of the ordinary, but as you people speak, I'm just kind of curious, because I just want to know. Brian, and I'll just start with you. Do you favor a differentiation between a group contribution and an individual contribution?
Well, I guess, you know, the group contribution is an aggregate of a number of different people, but I guess I would like to see them the same for both the group and the individual.
Thank you. Councilmember McCoy?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Ling. I just wanted to address a couple of things. Paul, thank you for bringing up the in-kind contribution issue. I saw that in the definitions. What I was referring to is that I just want to make sure that contracts are included in that when it gets to legal counsel and when they get ready to start formatting a contract. A resolution for us to take a look at. So I would like that, and myself, based on, I don't want this to come back with the legal going through the courts if we can help it. I hear what Member Hughes is pointing out here in regards to the amounts, if you differentiate them, are less likely to get brought before the courts. And I can give way on that if we can come to an understanding. And I do hear what you're saying, Mr. Colelli, in regards to as you change one thing, there's a trickle effect in regards to how it affects a different component of this document. I think that's why we will send it on to our legal counsel to make those adjustments so that those legal effects, and I hope that when they bring it back to us as a form of an ordinance, we can say, oh, okay, they'll point out where there was a problem. If we do change those numbers from what the majority on that, on your election commission recommended. I tend to go with the numbers here that are being identified by the on page 7 of 17, or Council Packet 13, which is the $200 limit for individuals and then $500 for groups. I realize that 527s will get out there. I think what really comes down to is how one who runs for office identifies themselves within the community. Their service to the community, and when they serve on boards and commissions, and how long they do that, and what boards and commissions they serve on, and things like that. You know, it comes across, you know, to the regular general community, a lack of commitment to the community when we don't see that, and so I think that is pretty clear to the community. What's happening when candidates come forward without those qualifying elements. And so not that I think that should be added in here, but I think 527s can be combated by the very fact that the community gets to know a person when they serve the community. And so I think there's some merit to that as well.
Before we go on, if there is a comment from the committee, I'd like to recognize them. So, Chris.
527s are the bugaboo. People keep talking about 527s, but the other way money can be spent on a campaign is through individual expenditures. And that's what I mean by being algorithmic. Look and see if the restrictions you make really meet your final intention. If you make a contribution limit low, $200, and if it doesn't satisfy me as an individual, I can run a $10,000 proxy campaign for anybody of my choosing as an independent expenditure. Because I think what you'll find out is you can't legally control my personal free speech. And so as long as I don't have guidance from a candidate, and I probably pretty much know what my candidate stands for anyway, I can put their name and their face and their message out to the tune of any amount of money I want to. And so that's what I'm trying to say is cranking a contribution limit down really low, I don't think really is going to accomplish your goals, given that there are other outlets for money.
Paul, you got a comment?
Yeah, one of the recommendations that we made was for independent contributions that the trigger for reporting is $100. And it's currently at $1,000. And so, again, we're asking for more reporting. Once we have more information, maybe we can come to some conclusions about what's going on. But right now, we don't see that information till further down the road when people finally get to the $1,000 mark. If they ever get to the $1,000 mark, maybe they run a $600 ad in the newspaper for the friends of, and we don't see that because it's not being reported. So we've just lowered the threshold for reporting, but not suggested a limit.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead, Marcy.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention to Councilmember Hanson, some of us did consider $100 contribution limit and found that, according to Brennan, it would not be defensible. The 2000 election in Longmont, almost 89% of the contributions were under the $200 limit, and 96.5% were under the $500 limit. When you do contribution limits, you have to have things called findings, supportable legal reasons that the courts will accept. $100 didn't make it. Boulder has $100, but they also have public financing, which makes it work for them, and we couldn't do it.
Throw in an additional comment to that is that I think a lot of people have looked at the Loveland ordinance, which also has a $100 limit, but that was not just an ordinance, that was a charter amendment that the city voted on, and that gives it more legal standing that way.
Okay. Councilmember Blue?
Thank you. I would invite you all, excuse me, to look at page 35 and page 38, because I think I figured out that candidate number 9 is me. Because, is that true? Because my colleagues here who were on your task force say that the bold print is the winner in that race. And
We were actually not allowed to see any names associated with any of the figures.
Well,
We
I-
actually chose not to.
I understand that, and I think Valerie did a good job of that. But I get to looking at it at the amount and the year of the election, and I knew that I'd won the highest vote getter in that race, and I thought, I think that's me. So I'd like to talk with you about in contrast to Councilmember Hanson's assertion that it eliminates persons from running. If you look at that, 163 people donated to my campaign. Now, I've lived here since dirt, so I do know a lot of people. And this is the 5th time I've ran for office of some kind in this vicinity, so that sort of counts for it. But out of those 163 contributions, 144 of those are less than $50. I would point that out. And beyond that, there is one in the $200 limit, which is a pretty hefty contribution. And Brian, I can't tell you who that was. I have no idea. I could probably go back and find if I could look at the chart. And I do know that I received a contribution from the Longmont Board of Realtors, which of course makes me a bad person in this group. But I do know that one. But I'd just like you to all look at the chart that's on page 38 and look at the way it's tiered. And that's pretty much the way campaign contributions run. You know, when you're active in your community, when you're a volunteer, when you serve on other boards, when you're a member of your church or whatever group that may be, when you work with kids, you know people. And I did have a pretty extensive mailing list, and that's where it came from. But to say that we should not have, shouldn't have the limits higher because that eliminates contributions from the average guy is, in my opinion, is just not true. And this is an example of that.
Okay, Doug?
I'm going to give you an argument that I've read a lot about, just as a matter of information. Incumbents have the advantage of exposure for 4 years. And people who are running as new candidates, people don't even know their name, and they've got to get their name out there. And if you limit the money too far, and then those candidates all of a sudden have trouble getting their name out there. And so I'm not arguing one way or the other, but I am giving you an argument about being careful about what kind of limits you put on this, because then you eliminate participation by new candidates.
Chris, you have a comment?
I think there's one behavior shown in these distributions, and there's a reason why a lot of contributions fall below $100, and that's because contributors' names are put in the newspaper if that $100 or higher. And so even though we have currently a wide open system, I would call this almost a natural distribution, except for the fact that people are reported in the paper, and I think that's what keeps them at $100 and less. They just don't want to be identified. When I ran for council, I had people tell me the same thing. Here's $90 because I don't want to be in the paper. I said, thank you very much. Now, I'd like to call your attention on that same page to candidate number 2 in Ward 2. That person ran a very low-dollar campaign, $1,560. They only took 15, 18, 19, 20, 21 contributions, and only one contribution fell in the $400 to $500 range. But that one contribution, if you eliminate that, eliminates 1/3 of that candidate's budget. And that, whether they got that contribution from realtors or mom and dad, that anchored their campaign. Which is why I personally, and I think the majority, didn't want to crank contribution limits down so low, is because the lesser candidates just won't be able to find any money at all. And it takes, in my estimation, about $5,000 to run even a marginally reasonable campaign in this town. I ran on less, and I didn't do so well. When I finally hit about $5,000 the second time, it worked better for me. And so I think you need to keep the system a little more open.
Well, don't go too far, Valerie, because first of all, I've got a couple of questions before I talk a little bit about campaign limits. First of all, and I don't know, Valerie, if you can answer this or not, or if you have to come back and retrieve this mic. I'd like to know a little bit more about 527s. My understanding is that they were created through federal legislation, and it was either the, I don't know, IRS code or the number in the federal legislation, the reason they come up with the term 527. Is correct? And could you tell me then, are they completely regulated at the federal level, or are they also regulated at the state level?
I am not by any means an expert on 527s. My understanding from the limited knowledge that I have is that they are regulated on the federal level. And where the 527 came from may be the IRS code. You may be correct on that. But my understanding is that they are regulated federally and that the states don't regulate them either.
Okay, so it's completely, all the rules and regulations to a 527 it's done at the federal level, correct? Okay, well, that's helpful
Marcia's
information.
shaking her head no. She may know more about it than I do, so.
No, the 4 527s are mavericks. They have, at the federal level, they have to say who they are. And that's just about it. They are not, they are trying, McCain-Feingold bill tried to regulate 527s, court threw it out.
Okay, but they were created by the federal government.
I don't know.
Limited regulation, so it's a federal.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a giant loophole.
No, I understand how powerful they are and how much money they have collected. Not generally for city council elections. Usually they're a little bit higher office. One other question, basically from Marcy and Marilyn. When you came up with your two numbers, $200 limit for individuals, $500 for organizations, how did you do that? And why do you think then that would pass a lawsuit test?
Okay, we went with the tiering because it was recommended by Brennan. We have been guided by Brennan ever since we were introduced to Brennan from the Brennan School of Law. Brennan is writing a nonpartisan book on Supreme Court decisions. is basically what Brennan is. And Brennan says the best way to do contribution limits is to have a tiered system. At one time in our group, we actually considered tiering the system for candidates and in one group, and at-large candidates and a mayor in the other group, in the larger group. That got shot down. Marilyn and I think Sarah, I'm not sure, Sarah, thought that the tiering would work better with the groups, and we wanted all groups to be included rather than trying to figure out which group meant what, and if they were political or not, if they were union or not. Let's just include either all groups or no groups.
Okay.
And so at one time we were discussing individual contributions only.
Okay.
And quite a few of us liked that, but we stuck with these numbers because they fell on, we looked at the numbers that you guys got for contributions, and we felt that these numbers were fair and would encapsulate just about all the contributions you got.
Okay. Well, thank you for presenting a minority report and for being so thoughtful about it. I very much, I do agree with the numbers. I guess I would have picked perhaps some different numbers, but learning more about how this was done, I can understand how you came to your minority recommendation. I think there's no doubt folks in this country know that money talks. And, we just went through, our country just went through this huge election cycle, and they sent a message. And they want change, and they want transparency, and they want to make sure that their elected officials represent everyone, not just selected people in a community. When we went back and we took a look and we asked the question to Longmont residents, how do you feel about campaign limits? It was interesting to see the results come back a couple months ago, and it was overwhelming that Longmont residents want some sort of campaign limits. And I think it's important. I just feel that we can't continue to do business as usual. We need to make changes. And I think while it is not perfect, and I understand that there are a lot of different ways that you can fund a campaign, believe me, I think it's important that we at least try. And we're not going to get a perfect system, but we sure have to try. And we can't just open the doors and say, okay, those that have a lot of money, you can donate as much as you want, and you can do whatever you want to do to back a candidate and make sure that your viewpoint gets elected to council, and you're the one that can represent me. I think it's important to have lower campaign contribution limits. You've picked 200 and 500. They seem reasonable. And I think that does give more people, especially in the city of Longmont, some feeling of comfort to know that their elected official is going to be representing them and not just an elect few. So thank you for your work. Thank everyone for your work. I know we're talking right now specifically on campaign contributions, but the amount of detail that you've gone through and have combed through all the ordinances and rules and forms and whatnot did take an enormous amount of work, and I do appreciate that. This one basic issue, though, there's no doubt you debated it quite a bit. We're debating it right here at council, and I assume later tonight we'll probably have some sort of straw poll or straw vote to see how it goes so we can give direction to our staff. But no matter how that vote turns out, thank you for your hard work.
Doug?
Yes. Mayor Lang, there is an implication that in the past our elections were influenced a great deal by money. I know one candidate who ran for mayor didn't use $1 to run by and won. I ran with $750. My opposition had much, much more money, and he was a fine person, but I was able to beat him in that campaign. Money is not the only aspect of politics. It's strategy, it's building a coalition, it's convincing the public in what you believe in. I do not believe that money has always unduly influenced politics in this town. When I came on council, I didn't know what political party my fellow council members were members of. I did not know how much money they raised. I don't think there is a lot of corruption in this town. And I think the public needs to know that, and I don't think there ever has been. So there's somehow, I'm getting the feeling that people are implying that there has been corruption in this town. Thank you.
Councilmember Levinson?
So Chris, just to settle who's who in the pages of statistics with no names, I was candidate number 2, and the $400 was my personal contribution, my husband's personal support of my campaign. One of the things we didn't separate out in those statistics were the contribution from the personal coffers of candidates. So while you could guess who my sugar daddy was, it was my husband. It was, absolutely appropriate that he and I decided to do that for my first run for office. You had also made a point that there had not been an adequate test, that you thought your perception was that $200 was too low from the suggestion of the minority report. And I would just like to point out that we tested that figure in a number of ways that the Brennan document suggested, in that there's a huge list on one of the pages, but I'll just give you a couple of items. Looking at how many contributions people generally got to raise their money. Also to see how much was given to candidates in recent pre-reformed elections and the amounts over what you proposed. Comparisons with state limits and federal limits. How much money was raised by challengers in competitive campaigns that would have been reduced under the new limits, and how pre-reform campaigns have been run in the jurisdiction and what techniques are available to keep costs down. As Councilmember Brown just pointed out, he's made the argument that it's not just money, it's organization. So there is an appropriate argument that follows the testing that is suggested to where the lower limit can be set. And I firmly believe that we have the statistical evidence. We have also evidence from the citizen survey, and that is absolutely defensible in court. The other item around campaign contributions and corruption, Brennan actually talked a lot about this, and there were also some Supreme Court cases, typically, most recently Nixon versus Shrink, Missouri, with the government PAC. And in that, Shrink held that you don't even need to have actual corruption. The influence of money is the perception of corruption, and there are very specific things where you don't actually have to have the corruption. It could be simply that the newspaper writes about the perceived influence of high dollar amounts of money in campaigns, and we've had plenty of that in the local media outlets, as well as the public seeing that candidates who had received contributions from one group or another have shown a bias, whether or not it's actual corruption or simply a long-standing precept of pay to play, which is, basically if you want to get in the game and have a good conversation with your elected officials, people believe that you got to pony up dollars to try to get the people elected. Now, I think that Councilmember Santos and I were singled out, repeatedly by a lot of people, and perhaps unfairly on both counts, for who we took money from. And in hindsight, you may want to think that you're always going to be tied to who you took money from and people's perception of how you vote. And I think that having those lower contribution limits helps candidates avoid a temptation to take money from a group that they may later feel is a liability for people saying, well, we think that you were corrupted by who you took money from. And a lot of what the individuals have commented on is also going to the fact that really the most important thing in the election and in democracy is the vote. And I don't want to lose track of the fact that the vote is the primary part of this election. And having lower limits will have candidates go after the vote and not simply chase the dollars.
Councilmember McCoy.
Thank you, Mayor Lang. When we're all done with this and we do take a look at the straw vote that we have here and give staff direction to go into developing an ordinance, the one thing that I want to say is that you know, when we're all done, I want to see this, and I will pursue this in the fall in regards to making sure that it is brought to a vote of the people, so that not only do we put it in place here, so that we set up it's for the short term of this year and for this next election cycle, but also as a election issue where we do put it out for a vote of the people, because I want to see the people have this, have their say and have their voice heard on this. And if it gets voted down in regards to some issue regarding the level of contributions, then we can always go back and readdress the ordinance to reflect that. But I think that's where I stand on this issue. So even though we figure out what we're going to do and it comes to some sort of coordination with our legal counsel, in the end, this just kind of is the Band-Aid effect of getting it so that it's fixed, so that coming throughout the remainder of the year and through this next election cycle in November, we get it to a point where we can have some answers and address some issues. But then I still am going to pursue bringing this as a council recommended item for the people to vote on.
Councilmember Hanson.
Thank you, Mayor Lang. I also want to support Councilmember McCoy's position that we should bring it to the ballot, and it sounded like that was pretty much unanimous with the election committee. But, well, oh, okay. I take that back.
Public financing.
No, only
Oh,
the
okay.
public financing. This is something that
Well, I guess I did.
would be, lose their minds over, I think.
Okay, well, I guess I did want to comment on something that I think Marilyn and Marcy, you both mentioned, that in Boulder, the reason why they were able to put a $100 limit was because they were publicly funded. And in Loveland, it was put on the ballot as a ballot issue, and that's what allowed them to be at a $100 limit. But
It makes it more defensible.
okay, so now are you saying
Portland,
that?
Oregon, they have a $5 limit.
Oh my. So, but are you saying that even if we do put this on the ballot, as Councilmember McCoy is suggesting, and I also support, if we do put this on the ballot, is it still in some legal jeopardy at a $100 level? So if we do put it on the ballot, then we should consider that option at keeping at the limit at $100.
Let me let Valerie maybe weigh in here.
Mayor Lang and members of council, yes, that anything that, even if you put it on the ballot, it could come under some legal challenge. It's more likely to stand up in court if it's been voted on, but even $100 limit voted on could have a legal challenge.
Well, if there's a lot of cities that get this on the ballot and establish a $100 limit, is it more likely to stand up in the future if we start to establish some precedents here?
Nixon versus Shrink, Missouri, which is mentioned in Brennan, was a Supreme Court case, shot down $100 limit. This is for the state of Missouri. They supported $1,000. No, actually, they shut down 100. They shut down 1,000, and I think they ended up supporting 1175 as the limit. But one of the reasons they shot it was shut down even though the public had voted on it and voted for it, and the Supreme Court still shot it down.
So even if we eventually plan to put this on the ballot, I'm not getting a real solid number of what is the absolute lowest number we could put on.
I would say
this.
200.
Okay.
Because that encompasses over the majority, over 3/4 of the contributions that were done in the last couple of election cycles.
And that's what you like to see is 3/4. That's the cutoff.
Well, it's over, actually. It's, in 2007, $200 was encompassed almost 89% of the contributions.
Okay. All right. Well,
So
thank
that pretty much covers everything, except those large, ones that are way out there.
you. Okay. Thank you.
Chris, you got a comment?
I would just like to show you another way to blow by these contribution limits. So currently we're unlimited. You can have one organization give unlimited funds. If you limit the funds, then the number of organizations will go unlimited. I can file corporations on the Secretary of State's website for 99 cents a filing. I can open 10 corporations, fund them each to $500, and personally do that, and then have $5,000 go to any candidate of my choice. Each one of those corporations would be a legal separate entity.
All right, Councilmember Santos?
Paul had a
Oh,
comment.
Roger, you originally fielded sort of a straw poll vote here, and I was so interested to hear the end of it. And we got to Karen, and then we just got it jumped around. And that was, you said, who would be in favor of a split between contributions to groups? And I'd love to hear the end of that. I think it sort of takes us in a direction.
I think we can, I think I know where three of them on the right are. And I'm in that camp. I would like to separate it, and as long as Councilmember Santos has the mic, if you care to tell us how you're feeling about splitting between groups and
I'll get to that
individuals.
last.
All right.
Councilmember Hanson, you said that, the only reason I remember that I received $5,000 for the realtors is because people keep bringing it up. I know a vast majority of those that gave me $15 to $100. In fact, I remember one person in particular called me and said, I don't have a lot, let me give you $15. Thank you very much. And I remember that person, and I see her quite often. If you take $5,000 or $1,500 or $1,000, you're going to be lumped in with that organization that you take the money with. But are you worth the salt? That if you don't come in and bring in, check that at the door and say, you know what, this person may have given me X amount of dollars, but I got to do what's best for the city, not what's best for the organization. So I don't think any person would be worth much if they said, you know what, they gave me $5,000, I'm just going to do everything they want me to do. I would hope that none of us on this side of the room would do that. Campaign finance reform, and I've worked on campaign finance reform before. I worked on it in Washington, D.C. Campaign finance reform is incumbent retention. You're going to make it very difficult for those not very well organized individuals to run a campaign. So, and then I heard about a charter amendment. It wasn't the recommendation of this of the task force to put this on limits whether they're $200 or $1,000 to a vote of the folks, to the vote of the people. And I'm not saying that it wouldn't be a good idea to put it to the vote to the community, but we have recommended an election task force that if a particular part of this ordinance does not work, then this group can come back to this council or future councils and say, you know what, we need to adjust this portion of the ordinance. A charter amendment, as we have found out with this last election, is pretty much a permanent thing. It's hard to overturn. I believe we need to have that the city and the council need to have that leeway to make adjustments to the ordinance. So I wouldn't be in favor of doing a charter amendment on what we're proposing. That's why we recommended a elections commission to be brought forth to help Valerie another set of eyes to look at issues that may be a little fuzzy and be compelled documents, but also to recommend to council, here are the task force did a good job, but here are some tweaks we found out in the last 2 elections that may not work. So, the tiered limits, I would be more, and I'd be in favor of it, straight across, we know have one limit. So it's not, well, individuals are better than groups and groups are better than individuals. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So I'm not in favor of a tiered system.
All right, appreciate your response. Let me just weigh in here. I don't want to see us get bogged down on where we take this to a vote of the people. Right now, I think what's important is we give these people some feedback on what we think of their recommendations and move on. Not that I don't appreciate the discussion, but we can have that discussion later. So, Councilmember Hanson.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to clarify one remark that I made there. I do remember most of my contributors that were under $100. I just don't remember the amounts. Whereas when they're over $100 or more, I have a tendency of remembering the amount. And I would certainly think you would remember the amount if it was $5,000 and who it was coming from. And so, but I guess the reason why I was interested in seeing it come on the ballot is just for the very reason that it would lock it in for some length of time, and it shows that the voters support the issue rather than it just being simply supported by council, and so that we know that we're getting support by most of the citizens in the city of Longmont.
Councilmember Blue.
Right now, when people take up their papers tomorrow morning, the local paper, and read about whatever article Rachel writes about this discussion, I would bet you that the majority of the readers are going to say, what are they spending all this time on? Because most people really don't care. Unless you've been a candidate or worked hard for a candidate, you really don't have a clue, and you really don't think this is important. I'm not saying I don't think it's important, because I have been a candidate a few times. And that's why, again, I'd like to thank the task force, because I think you wrestled with a lot of the issues that we're trying to define at the moment, and I appreciate that you've read all the documentation, you've read all that lengthy bibliography, and you've brought these issues forward. 2 quick things, one that I meant to mention earlier when I was talking about my own campaign. In about, I think it was about the 3rd week before the election, I got a sizable campaign contribution. It wasn't 1,000, but it was several hundred. And because, first of all, I didn't know the group, happened to be a developer, didn't think it had local foundation at all, and I just didn't think it was appropriate because I had no personal connection with this group. And I wrote them a nice letter and returned it and thanked them very much, but said I just wasn't interested at this time. As it's turned out, I am more familiar with the group now, but I think the candidates can choose to do that if they're being approached by somebody that they have no clue is local or has any local ties. And I would have considered that inappropriate in my case, and I chose to turn it down. I would like to go on record as saying I probably don't think we need a tiered system. I'm not saying I'm adamantly opposed to it, but that's just my inclination right now. And I would definitely not see this as a ballot issue that ought to come forward.
Councilmember Levinson.
Well, I think one of the things that happened when we were working on the committee, and I think the reason we got stuck in the contribution limit where we were and sort of came to an impasse is that we made a preliminary vote on tiered or not tiered before we talked about limits. And I think that was a fatal error, and it locked us into something that we struggled then with the limit, as opposed to recognizing that individuals have a choice to make to support a candidate. However, aggregate groups and political action committees or small donor committees of industry groups or lobbyists who collect, who have a lobbyist interest in an issue that might come before the city, have a different representation scope than an individual. And that's why I was in favor of the 2-tiered system, because we had, this contribution limit I felt, and still do, for individuals and groups is too high. However, I felt that not having the tiered system didn't give us a chance to recognize that when you have a large membership group They may have a small donor committee, and I think under state rules, when you have a small donor committee, you can only give $50 under state law. And that $50 from maybe 100 individual goes to not just local candidates, it could go to state candidates, it could go to federal candidates, and of that $50 contribution, maybe only $5 gets used in the local election, but not to allow groups and recognize the power of groups to associate. I think by not having a two-tiered system doesn't recognize that important contribution and element in our community.
Councilmember Banker?
I would like to make a motion, and I'd like to direct staff to prepare the correct ordinances and any internal rulemaking that you need to do to accept 26 of the recommendations, with the 27th being a $200 limit for individual contributions and a $500 limit for groups, and to come back to us in the next couple of weeks, I'll leave that open, with 2 months, well, in the next couple of weeks or months, with the measures for us to vote on them and debate once again.
I'd like to sever that motion.
All right, now we're gonna, there's a second. Councilmember Santos, you have a,
Yes, thank you, Mayor Lang. You know, it's been mentioned, I know there's a motion on the floor, but there was another topic that I thought was very important. Loveland's ordinance has not been tested. Is that correct? So they have an ordinance that hasn't seen the light of day.
Loveland's is not an ordinance, it's a charter amendment.
Excuse me, charter amendment.
And it hasn't been tested yet, no.
So, and then I hear Portland, Oregon's been brought up. What's the rough population of Portland, Oregon?
I have no idea.
Couple million, possibly? Okay, so a lot bigger than the city of Longmont.
And it's been tested.
So, well, I'm not talking about testing, I'm talking that they have a bigger population. They have, I'm sure, well, we're all facing budget problems these days. So I don't know how their public financing is being done for elections. Boulder just had an election last November. They had 11 candidates and most of them, the majority of them got public financing. I would say, okay, 50%, maybe half. So that's something to consider. If you make the limits too low, it's harder for everyone to participate. Not just those big committee people, those big folks that have write big checks. As I said, this is incumbent retention. And I will not be in favor of this motion.
go ahead, Councilmember Blue.
Mayor, I would like to sever this motion. Do I move to sever it? Is that what I do need to do? Okay, I would move to sever this motion and have us vote on the 26 recommendations and then have the other part be a separate motion.
Is there a second to that?
Second.
I would second the motion, however, I want a clarification. So we're going to, first of all, vote on a tiering and then vote on contribution limits?
Was tiering part of the report?
Yeah, yep. That was, and I guess my motion would be to divide the question of tiering when it comes, I don't know if that was part of Karen's motion. And I would divide that motion further. I would divide that second section even further. So I don't know if we vote on the first one or not. Excuse me, we vote on the first
Okay.
one.
So you offered the second, Sarah?
Yes.
All right. So let me make sure we all understand what your motion is, Mary. You want to split out the campaign contribution piece from the rest of the recommendations?
Yeah.
You want to separate and vote on the 26 recommendations first and then vote on the contribution limit.
Okay. Any other?
Except that item number 26 is one contribution limit.
There's
So we'd be voting on 25 and not 26.
You're voting on all recommendations except contribution limits, right?
Okay, because I think Karen specified 26. It would actually be 25.
Okay. Let's vote on that. Mary's, we're gonna separate the question.
Vote to separate, okay.
Vote to separate?
Mm-hmm. Passes with Hanson, McCoy, and Banker dissenting. So, given that, why don't we go ahead and do it in separate motions? And Councilmember Banker, do you want to separate it? Start with the motion.
Okay. I would like to direct our staff to prepare the necessary documents for council to vote on all of the recommendations presented to us by this committee, except for the items dealing with contribution limits.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, let's vote. There we go. Passes with Councilmember Santos dissenting. Follow-up motion?
Well, my motion then would be to accept the campaign contribution limits of $200 for individuals and $500 for groups per election cycle.
Seconded.
Is there any comments on that? Let's vote. Passes with Councilmember Blue and Santos dissenting.
So Mayor Lang and members of council, we thank you very much. It looks like we have, at least the attorney's office has some work cut out, and this task force will be at their disposal too. So
Our thanks to you. This was a lot of work, and we appreciate it, and I am pleased that we took out some onerous pieces of what we were dealing with before and cleaned things up, and I think it's been very helpful, and we do appreciate it, so thank you for your time. Marilyn?
Can I make one more comment, Mayor?
Sure,
Thank you. One thing we haven't talked about at all that was in the report was public education around a new ordinance. And I believe the whole task force felt that that was a very important component. That, as Councilmember Blue said, people may not understand all the ramifications here and why we spend so much time on it. And I think most of the task force felt that they would be willing, don't let me put words in everybody's mouth here, but to contribute to some kind of public education effort around a new ordinance. So I just wanted to.
And you know, another thing that we just passed on is having an election committee help when we get into this thing, and I would look to this group out here as hopefully would be volunteers that would be interested in something like that. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't, but anyway, I'm just saying that there's a lot of expertise. So again, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
welcome.
Let's take 5 minutes.
On the one we saw Friday, and now it's 19.
Right, so you had one in your packet, and then I emailed another one once we had the final council vote in. So, yes, so the one that's on your desk is the one with final, all 7 council votes in. Right.
Everybody has voted on.
Everybody
This-
has
okay,
voted
all
on the
right.
one that's in your, on your
All right.
desk today, yes. And so, as you can see from there, we have a kind of a clear number 1, I think. And then we have a couple that received 18 points. and 2 that received 17 points. And then after that, it seems like there may be sort of a cut, but it really depends on how many topics you would choose to take to your council retreat.
Yeah,
Those are the
and
2 pieces
and
we
I'll
need to
just,
decide.
I'm just gonna weigh in on this thing, and when you put together the agenda, and I didn't keep it from last time, I think you had it divided up into 5 topics over the 2 days. Was there 2 or 5?
Because you were doing the
So- Right, so Mayor Lang and members of council, we had the team building on both days, and we had 10 hours of conversation. I just broke that up into 5 topics, 2 hours each, but you could break it up any way you wanted to, or you could eliminate one of the team building sessions and add more time. So we would absolutely be flexible with however many topics you chose. I just was trying to give you an idea that if you chose as many as 5, you would only have approximately 2 hours per topic to discuss.
Well, I'll just weigh in on my personal preference. I think 5 is enough, and fewer are better in my experience, so I'll just say that's how I feel about it. So Councilmember McCoy?
Yes, I agree with you, Mayor Lang. 5 is enough, and I'm willing to go with the top 5. The only caveat that I have to this is that the number 9 on our list is the affordable housing topic. I would like to see this maybe recommended to our to have that looked at and responded on by our Human Relations Commission, and then some sort of educational report given back to us so that we can take a look at that component at a later date. I think that's one that would be worthwhile, but I just don't want that to be dropped is the only issue. So, and as far as the team building thing, I still feel that it's a good exercise, a quality exercise to go with number 2 on our executive summary, which is the DISC training, and so I'll be supporting that if it comes to a motion.
Councilmember Levinson?
Yes, if we're going to look at the top 5 and including the number 5 item on the list, the Main Street revitalization, I had attended council retreats for a very long time, and it seems like this topic is covered every single year, and there's not a lot substantive that comes out of what council has discussed. And I know last year we talked about that same topic, and we had experts from Loveland come in, and while I want to see things move forward downtown, I don't think that having another discussion with maybe the same kind of expert speakers is really moving things forward. Perhaps the better thing to do would be once a quarter to devote a topic at a study session to checking in with the progress of what's happening downtown and how all the programs that are being set up work and integrate one with the other. And the Downtown Development Authority is working on a lot of new initiatives. We've been having a lot of their initiatives come forward, not just bit by bit, but pretty holistically, and presentations a couple of times a month from Mary Murphy Bessler and the board. So I don't want to regrind the same topic over and over again. So while I did vote pretty high, I believe, to have that topic on, I'd want to see something groundbreaking to move it, to take it to the next level. And I think we're already taking things to the next level. We just need something to, a project to happen. And discussing again, I don't think it's going to get us a project. So I would, due to that last discussion we had around campaign finance reform and how complex the component of publicly funded campaigns for local office is, I would like to have the council explore that and some options, because if citizens want to bring that forward, the financing of it and how that mechanism work would be a public policy issue by the city, and citizens groups just can't even know where that room is in the budget if we're going to budget for it. So that's just my opinion.
Councilmember Banker?
And I have a different opinion. I think Main Street revitalization, actually, last year, we did bring in Loveland, but we talked about economic development initiatives, not Main Street. They're really not doing Main Street. They're starting to do some Main Street. I would very much like to see perhaps a national expert come in with some fresh ideas. This is the one area where there's actually some money in the budget, where there's several $1,000,000 from the TIF that needs to be invested in the next 1 or 2 years. We've got 3 new LDDA board members that have no training, or as far as I understand, limited training in this area, and I think it would be a good way to go forward. I agree, I don't want to rehash old stuff, because we do tend to do that. And then maybe leave with an action plan, saying 2009, here's what we're going to get done. I guess the one area where I'm not that crazy about, but I voted for it, was item number 3. And if we are going to move forward with item number 3, talking about regional issues, I'd like to have a better, more information than what we've got here. This piece here rambles. I don't think it's time to be talking about reauthorizing the street tax, since it's not up until 2011. So quite frankly, I'm not interested in that piece. And I'm not quite sure just talking about the National Economic Stimulus Plan would it be interesting? Yes. But there's no details out yet. We won't know for a couple of months until President Obama starts putting together his plan. And I'm not quite sure how we're going to fit into that, although I understand the National Governors Association today is meeting in D.C., and they're submitting some ideas to President-elect Obama. But quite frankly, some of the other regional issues, I'd like to see them nailed down a little bit more, so we know how to be spending our time. And if we set that aside, that would be fine with me too. But I know we voted. We've got the top 5. I guess I'm suggesting maybe we take 3 out. I'm not quite sure if others would agree with me.
Councilmember Blue?
Thank you, Mayor. I pretty much agree with the 5 that received the top votes. One of mine that I voted for higher than shows up here is the affordable housing piece, and maybe it's because I'm on the Longmont Housing Authority. But I would support Councilmember McCoy's suggestion, but I'd like to see it come as a study session, and I don't want it limited just to the human services housing, because you may recall last meeting I talked about a presentation that I heard at the chamber with LHA and the Thistle and, help me, what was the third group? Oh, the realtors, but there was a third group, and now the names just left me. I'm embarrassed to tell you, but anyway, there was the 4 entities: Longmont Housing Authority, Thistle. What would be I can't. Anybody know? Habitat. Thank you, Karen. Yes.
The city, Karen.
And Kathy was there to represent the city. And it was excellent, particularly as each of them fit together with each other, so that they're not duplicating and they're referring to each other. And I think we as a group, need to hear about that. So if you want to involve that other board too, fine, but I'd like to see that at a study session sometime. And I would agree with Karen that the 5 are set. It's pretty obvious. In fact, the Main Street revitalization, if you look at the scoring, received the high priority from 4 people. And that, I think it's important, and if we could approach it maybe from a different angle, that would be great. The other thing I would suggest on number 3, see if we can get somebody from the Governor's Blue Ribbon panel to come and join us on that. I'm trying to remember, was Glenn Vaught a member of that panel? He was here the day they did a presentation. Who? Will Tour is there. Glenn Vaught lives just in Meade. So both of those are, yeah, the 2 together might be good. And of course, he was just reelected to the legislature. So let's bring at least somebody from the panel for that. Thank you.
Councilmember Santos?
Thank you, Mayor Lang. I would agree with Councilmember Blue and McCoy. The affordable housing, I think, should come back as a study session topic with the board. Have a nice, good, long conversation. I would be willing to drop this down to 4. I believe Councilmember Blue brought up a very good point of bringing and Councilmember Banker, having Tour and Vlad come down for number 3. I think that'd be great. It would not cost, I don't think it would cost us anything. I'm more concerned about also saving some money. I would not be in support of bringing in the team builder. You know, if we can get some folks that can come at little or no cost, I believe that's the way to go. If you were going to drop one, I would drop the environmental board sustainability. It got 3 high and the rest are mediums, and bring in the Main Street revitalization. So those would be the 4 that I would like to see and have a more in-depth conversation, especially with the budget, fast tracks, and downtown revitalization. It's definitely important. I don't believe we have the 3rd member. We have a vacancy on the LDDA, which will be voted on in December, so that new person will be on the board. It's good and I think we should meet with the LDDA board from time to time. So I believe that is definitely an important topic that needs to be discussed. So those are my 4.
Councilmember McCoy?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Lang. I just wanted to comment on number 8. I agree that it should be a study session, but maybe we should talk at a time when we're looking at maybe the Panettone Mall situation as well with that particular one, because this is a way of helping the mall revitalize itself by bringing something like Front Range over to it. It brings a ready group of people and that then might spend money there. So it seems logical at the time we talk about that, maybe we talk about these 2 things together.
I'm going to go with the 5, and that's what we kind of agreed to, and that's where the votes were. The only comment I would make, and I'm not minimizing the importance of fast tracks and RTD issues, that's something that's going to get a lot of attention, a lot of conversation, probably on a weekly basis. That'll be a moving situation. We can get an update, but this thing changes weekly. The other thing I would mention is we've got an opportunity, and I'll talk a little bit about this in our comments. The city of Thornton's trying to pull together a group of people to talk about their fast tracks issue, taking the north line up to Thornton and beyond to Highway 7. And then we've got the I-25 EIS thing that has a transit piece to it. So there might, we may want to expand that a little bit to just look at a more encompassing transit solution that might impact Longmont is all I'm saying. But it's important. My only concern is it changes weekly, and so what we learn will be changed very frequently. So the other thing on Main Street revitalization, yeah, we do talk about it a lot, and I think we continue to talk about it because we think it's important. One thing I would like to have some discussion about at the retreat, if we keep it as an item, is talking about the traffic study and what we're going to do with traffic down there. So that would be something that I'd encourage Gordon to bring into that thing because that's something that just hasn't been addressed. I know we've done the study. I think we need to understand how it affects what we may want to do on Main Street. So, Councilmember Banker.
I think everyone has on their desk a memo from Marion Murphy talking about agriculture as an economic vitality stimulus. I guess if there's any way we can work this into the, which one is it? Number 4, achieving environmental sustainability. I think that would be a good element to put in there. I'm not saying it's the whole session, but something that could be touched upon.
So Sandy, Councilmember Levinson.
I would support that idea to include that because it certainly falls under that that topic, and I think that in general, land use issues, especially with the kind of land use we have in our areas adjacent to open space, being under agricultural would be a good discussion, and perhaps we could include landowners in the agricultural areas bordering the city to participate in in that discussion. So I think it might have some more far-reaching effects into the community.
So it sounds like we're going with the 5 topics. So you need input on what beyond that?
So I need some input onto the team building piece, which option you would like to use for the team building.
And the options are?
So the first option is to have a short team building session on both Friday and Saturday, completely run by city staff, and I would obviously partner with our HR department and their organizational development folks, which I think is Bobby, to be able to pull together something for Friday and Saturday. Have a 2 to 3 hour team building on just Saturday morning, led by the outside consultant on disc training. And then option 3 is to have a short team building session on Friday, led by city staff, and the Saturday, led by the outside consultant on the disc training.
Okay, Councilmember Blue?
I need to ask a question. That number 2, a web assessment tool would be utilized by council and executive directors prior to training. Does that mean you spend time in preparation to do this?
And
I am opposed to anything that's going to take more time other than concentrating on the 5 topics. I would support at this time number 1. Depending on the schedule, if we need it both days, I'm not opposed to that, but I don't want to see spending that money. I'd rather see us, if we have some expenditure, if we have to bring in an expert on one of our topics to assist us in that.
Councilmember McCoy?
It's just, just to answer Councilmember Blue's question, it's a very short questionnaire that you fill out, and then they make an assessment based on that questionnaire.
Could you answer, excuse me?
Councilmember Levinson?
Thank you, Mayor. Could you explain to me what the acronym DISC stands for?
That's a good question. Mayor Lang, Councilmember Levison, let me look up and see if she actually puts that acronym in here, unless Councilmember McCoy remembers what it's for. Let's see here. Let me find it. Let me find information.
Why do I always ask those questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what it says.
Okay. Sorry, I just, it might illuminate what was it. Are we gonna be throwing are we gonna throw Greek, historical Greek objects across the field?
Is it like disc golf?
Disc golf.
Sandy,
Yeah, and Mayor Lang, I'm not seeing what the acronym
Well,
actually
let's
stands for.
kind of move on. Councilmember Banker?
And my understanding is that it would be similar to doing colors or Myers-Briggs or something along those lines, because I've done some of those things before, and I actually have found them very interesting, very helpful, and it does give you tips on how to work with one another, because you can look at someone and say, oh yeah, you're a green or you're an orange. I understand how you think, and while that sometimes can be funny, it does give you a different idea as to how you can better communicate with one another and try to team build and get some things done. So I've enjoyed those kinds of exercises, and I have found them very useful, and actually have had my former staff, we've taken a couple of them, and it really did, one, it was a lot of fun, and 2, it was helpful in the future when you're working on projects together.
Councilmember Santos?
Thank you, Mayor Lang. Well, it's all fun and games. I would like to move number 1. Have a short team building session on both Friday and Saturday, with the caveat that if we didn't finish what we need to on Friday, that maybe that team building gets pushed back to potentially the end of the day on Saturday. Let's make us work.
Second.
Okay, any comments? Let's vote. Fails with Councilmember Hanson, McCoy, Banker, and Levinson dissenting.
So Mayor Lang and members of council, my web backup in the back just gave me what DISC stands for. It's dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. Different personality types in which you're determined by taking a 10-minute web survey.
Okay.
Thank
well,
you.
Is there a second motion? Councilmember McCoy?
I move that we choose option number 2.
Okay, is there a second? Second. Okay, let's vote. Passes with Lang, Blue, and Santos dissenting. Okay, so we've got our team building thing. You got your agenda. Well, there's a red color and there's a green color. We'll work it out. There's no problem here.
I think we do need team building.
What else do you need, Sandy?
Mayor Lang, that's all I need. Thank you very much.
Okay. So with that, we are down to mayor and council comments. Let me, I've got a couple I wanted to make. I assume everybody saw this. If you didn't see it before, you saw it tonight, this letter from the city of Thornton, trying to put together a transportation meeting. And we're all invited, so I just want to make sure you're aware of that.
Maybe we should carpool together.
There you go.
We already have 3 things at that time.
Well,
including art and public
that's,
places.
hey, if you can't make it, you can't make it. But my point is, they're struggling with the same issue that most fast tracks routes are struggling with, the possibility of them not getting fully funded. So I plan to go, and we'll see how it all turns out, but I wanted to make sure you were aware of this. One thing I wanted to ask us, we'll be having our new representative join us. When does she come? The 16th? And you know, she's going to have responsibility for things that go on in the way of transportation. We've got this thing on I-25 North, whether we have a transit solution or an all-highway widening solution. It would be interesting to kind of get an idea, and we've never actually sat down and decided of those 2 proposals what we prefer. If you have any comments, I'd be glad to hear them, but if we're going to ask her to get involved, it'd be nice to know where we stand as a council on which one of those proposals that we have as a preference, one with transit or one without transit. So if you care to weigh in on that, I would be happy to hear how you are on that. The last thing I'm going to say while I have the floor, and this is all I've got, next week I've got to be away on business Tuesday night. I know we had scheduled board appointments. I guess I will just ask, is there an opposition if we would move those to the 16th rather than the 9th? And if you have a problem with that, that's fine. I understand that, but I kind of like when we get into board appointments, all 7 of us be here. So, is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Banker.
First of all, your first question, did you want us to answer that tonight? About transit versus highways on I-25?
Don't have to, but I
Okay,
I
well,
think-
real quick, my first choice is the commuter rail from Fort Collins down to Longmont. But 2 other things. One is we had Mike from, was it Longmont High School? That came and wanted to do the tricycle parade. Okay, so city attorney, how can we help Mike get his parade? Is there something that we can do to assist and,
You all chip in.
can we, one, waive the permit, and what
Well,
was the
no, let me-
requirement for the
let me-
insurance?
You know, that we do have a permit ordinance, and one thing that the ordinance does not provide for, and that is a waiver of fees by the city council.
Oh,
So there is a provision in there for appeals of decisions and that to go to the city manager, who has some authority with respect to some of those things regarding the permit. So I would let the process work its course.
so have they appealed then to the city manager to allow them to have their parade?
Mayor, I would say that the city attorney is saying that this process is probably going to work out just right. There is no insurance requirement for parades, and so therefore we don't have an issue about waiving
Okay.
insurance. And maybe if this process has a chance of weighing in and moving forward, that it's probably going to result in a parade as they need to have a permit for without any obstacles.
Thank you.
Other than Ninth Avenue.
Okay,
I can assure you, any obstacle like that is going to be dealt with appropriately with safety requirements and police officers and everything else.
right,
That's what
I
I'm
was
talking about.
hoping there might be some police officers to assist. The last thing that I wanted to bring up is I've talked to almost everybody, but and everyone that I've talked to has been very enthusiastic about this. Putting on just a little something for our senior staff and for some of our staff that work with us at council on a regular basis, a little holiday event, and we were talking about the possibility of maybe doing it on the 16th, where council members had at least tentatively agreed to chip in a little bit of money to provide dinner to our senior staff. Sandy suggested, since we've got Congressman-elect Markey coming in, that maybe then we were going to have a reception anyway, maybe we can turn that into dessert and coffee. But it would be some sort of small thank you for all the hard work that we make you go through and all the headaches we give you on a regular basis, where we will put some business items aside and just, hopefully have a nice time. So if any ideas on how to do this, or any ideas even on the date, if you want to change the date, feel free. Please let me know soon, otherwise I'll just plow ahead. But I'd like to get some ideas from you guys, especially on food, or who to go for food, or maybe some folks can bring in, a dish or something too, I don't know. I thought about a potluck actually, but hopefully something a little bit nicer and something hot. So it's not going to necessarily be, sandwiches. So please give me your thoughts.
Councilmember Santos?
Thank you, Mayor Lang. Sandy, when we meet with Congresswoman-elect Markey, and I'm not quite sure, because I haven't seen it in the paper, what committees she has been appointed to by the Speaker and the Majority Leader. I think those would be good pre-meeting information that we should have. Since we are, I'm assuming with her district she's going to be on agriculture, but I'm hoping that somewhere she'll be on transportation. So that's one of the things I think we need to have. I'd like to congratulate Judith Anderson as the new library director. She has been filling that role in an interim basis after our last library director, Tony Brewer, retired and went to Erie to start up their new library in that area. So congratulations to Judith. She's been a joy to work with, and I look forward to working with her in the future. So thank you.
Councilmember Levinson?
I guess I would like to encourage everyone to get involved to whatever extent they can with all the great public events coming up, beginning with the full calendar. I don't even know how many things the LDDA is doing the next 10 days. I leave that up to Mary Murphy Bessler. She just gives us that sheet of paper, and we do whatever we can. I'm a little bit curious, Karen, of whether or not we're going to have to declare this little potluck a public meeting, and we'll be feeding the public too. So depends on how big a dish you want us to bring. I guess we'll have to coordinate pretty well. I guess as far as which option for I-25, for me it's a matter of what's best for Longmont and what could be funded. If there's more money for funding with the rail option, that we can get money from higher up on the food chain, like the federal government is willing to support, inner city rail, that might be the option we want to look at. But again, I would like to have an opportunity to see what the Congresswoman-elect, what kind of committee she's on, and what kind of relationships she can build with members on the Transportation Committee if she's not appointed to that committee. Let's see, there was something else I was going to say and I can't remember now. Anyway, that's it for now.
Councilmember Hanson?
Mayor, I just wanted to respond to your question. I'm in favor of a transit solution more than a highway widening solution. I think it's convenient that our crude oil prices are really low right now, but I think that's due to our international economy not doing very well, and I think crude oil prices are going to go back up, and I think a transit solution would be more viable to us in the future.
Thank you. Councilmember McCoy.
Mayor Lang, I agree with Councilmember Hanson in regards to that option in regards to transportation. In regards to Councilmember Banker's point in regards to senior staff and giving a little bit of a special thank you, maybe we could approach the Giggling Greek in regards to maybe preparing something. And then I just wanted to remind people to remember to buy local campaign that Mary Murphy Bessler was bringing before us. So buy those gift cards that she brought up last week. So just trying to get people to remember to do that. Thanks.
Councilmember Blue.
Thank you, Mayor. Regarding the meeting with Thornton, and I apologize I can't be there. I already have 3 things scheduled that night, and 2 of them are city. This cost situation is going to be a controlling factor, and so I kind of agree with Councilmember Levison that, you know, we need to see what in terms of federal support there will be for where we need to go, because there is no rail line right now along I-25. So if you had a north rail corridor, it would probably be our line coming through Longmont and then going on. And I used to be a consultant with that group, so I definitely support it. But I'd like to keep our options open. I think I-25 in terms of widening and improvements is already in the tip, and they're in the process of doing that. So for future work, I would hope it would be transit, and I hope that transit would be rail.
Okay. Councilmember Levinson.
I thought of what I wanted to mention before. I saw the article in the newspaper with our finance director voicing some concerns over our revenue stream. I am curious about whether or not when we craft the contracts that are one-year contracts with various entities, if we could have a special stipulation in the contracts that say we will do those full once-a-month payments if we have the revenue, and get an agreement up front notifying them that they would agree to maybe a 5% cut that would come towards the end of the year if necessary. That, I mean, frankly, I'm quite concerned we might run out of money, and we will have made all these one-year contracts that lock us in contractually to these payments, and we'll get to the third quarter and we won't have enough operating funds and no flexibility to have any kind of wiggle room. So I'm throwing out the figure 5%. I don't know if that's the appropriate figure, but realistically, we have to figure out a way that we can have some flexibility in these yearly contracts. And that the intention would be not just with organizations that we deal with for economic development, but also any of the social service agencies as well, because I think the funding for all these outside groups is predicated on us having that revenue. And we're balancing the budget based on the fact that we're going to have money to pay through the end of the year. And I'd also like staff to come back with some plan as to, if we enacted a hiring freeze, what kind of impacts that would have on our current situation. And I don't think, we can wait until the end of January to, if we're going to be signing contracts in December, we can't wait until the end of January to start talking about what do we do if we're in crisis mode in 2009 and looking forward to the 2010 budget at that point is fine, but we have no money to finish out 2009. That's a bigger concern for me at this point.
Okay. City Manager?
Nothing tonight, Mayor.
City Attorney? Adjourn?